Hello everyone. We hope you're doing well. We're doing great, and we truly appreciate your ongoing support. We'd like to briefly address some comments regarding our audiobook series. Rest assured, progress is ongoing. That said, your feedback is vital. If there's a novel you particularly enjoy and want to hear more of, please let us know in the comments. Each chapter requires a financial investment, so we can only continue series that receive strong audience interest. Although we retain core names and plot lines, we make significant editorial changes to enhance clarity, pacing, and immersion. These are not simple recitations. We work hard to deliver a polished, thoughtful listening experience. Without sufficient feedback or engagement, we may need to discontinue a series. So if you're enjoying something, don't stay silent. Your input truly matters. Note, our default audio speed is 3x. If that's too fast, let us know. We're happy to adjust it. Interested in early access to unreleased audiobooks? Visit our Patreon. You'll get to experience new content before it reaches YouTube. Just to clarify, I'm a fan like you. I've purchased these novels and adapted them with care, while respecting all rights and guidelines. For updates, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, X. YouTube update: recently, YouTube flagged some of our content for including mature themes, realistic violence, and darker story elements. As a result, we've decided to stop uploading anything that violates YouTube's guidelines. If you'd like access to the full, uncut versions including the more intense or mature content, you can find them on our Patreon page, where we upload everything first. Available now on Patreon: Shattered Innocence transmigrated into a novel as an extra. Transmigrating over 10,000 years late, I was forced to become a mighty presence. I, the celestial dragon, rule the heavens through the double gate, reigning supreme in countless worlds with peace taming, Tower of God sequence strength, cultivation when you take things to the extreme. Naruto is an Uchiha with cyst. WTF, the centuries-old ancestor in our family take concubine again. Plus 18, Ecchi, reincarnated in Bleach as a wizard. Thanks for listening and happy listening, and sprinted toward the inpatient ward. Moko, waiting in the lobby, caught sight of him. Before she could say anything, Chisato urgently asked, "Where's Kazusa?" She instinctively answered, "Third floor," and pointed toward a staircase. Without hesitation, Chisato rushed past her, taking the stairs 3 steps at a time and disappearing from view in an instant. Miko glanced at the no running sign posted on the wall nearby but said nothing. She simply quickened her pace and followed after him. When she reached the hallway, she saw Kazusa, who had previously stood before her with a tense, unreadable expression, now crying uncontrollably in her boyfriend's arms. Tears streamed down her face as she mumbled something incoherently. Chisato held her tightly, his expression filled with both pain and tenderness, gently wiping away the tears on her cheeks. Miko felt this was not the time to interrupt them, so she quietly turned away. She needed to check in on Dr. Takanagi and see how things were progressing. For now, she didn't have to worry about Kazusa. Even after 30 minutes had passed, Kazusa still hadn't fully calmed down. Though her crying had gradually stopped, the sadness on her face remained undeniable. "I want to see my mom. I want to see mom." Chisato nodded. Supporting Kazusa, he helped her into the hospital room. This room was clearly designed for high-class patients, equipped with a caregiver's bed, a television, a reclining sofa, and a private bathroom. Yuko lay on the most prominent white hospital bed, her eyes shut, lips completely pale, and complexion deathly white, so weak that she seemed to be on the verge of vanishing. Kazusa crouched beside the bed and gently held her mother's hand, which had an 4 needle inserted into it. Her mother's hand was even colder than she had imagined. The person she had once admired like a towering mountain, the one she had always seen as her ultimate rival to surpass, was now lying there so suddenly on that stark white hospital bed. Chapter 314, How Much? After learning the full situation from Ms. Kadu and witnessing her unconscious mother with her own eyes. With a loud crash, it felt as if a ceramic jar had shattered inside Kazusa's head. Her senses dulled, and everything she saw and heard seemed to drift farther and farther away. Even the doctor's words became distant and muffled. It felt like her soul had floated out of her body, observing everything from a third-person perspective. Even though this was happening to her, she felt detached, as if it had nothing to do with her. Because just the other day, "Mom, weren't you still chatting with me at home, debating which celebrity had the best looks? And when you left the house, didn't you flash that annoyingly cheerful smile, saying you'd been cooped up for too long and were finally going back to work? And that, thanks to your job, you might even meet some good men for a date? Yuko-san will be fine." Chisato also crouched down slightly and placed his warm palm over their clasped hands. Miss Kadu had said something similar earlier, yet somehow, it felt completely different when Chisato said it. Unlike Miss Kadu, his words carried absolute certainty. Kazusa didn't know why, But just from that single sentence, she could feel his unwavering conviction. Her tear-swollen eyes turned toward him, and she nodded. Before Chisato arrived, she hadn't even dared to stay in the room for long, let alone look at her mother. She lacked the courage to keep her eyes on her mother's frail, pained face. The suffocating helplessness of being unable to share her suffering weighed heavily on her chest. A surge of overwhelming emotions had defeated her, turning her into a coward who fled the hospital room, unable to do anything but linger anxiously in the hallway outside. Her dazed and despairing mind had been sinking deeper and deeper into negative emotions until Chisato arrived. Only then did the bottled-up emotions finally burst out along with her tears. Ignorance breeds fearlessness. She had always considered herself a strong and independent person, but after experiencing this firsthand, she realized she was neither strong nor brave. Kazusa didn't want to leave her mother's side, but she couldn't resist Chisato's gentle persuasion. At last, she released her mother's hand and sat down on the sofa, picking up the bread Miss Kadu had bought earlier. She had no appetite, but she still tore off small pieces, forcing herself to eat them with milk. Chisato affectionately patted her head before pointing toward the door and standing up. Nearly panicking, Kazusa grabbed the hem of his shirt, causing the milk carton in her hand to drop to the floor. Chisato, where are you going? Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. Chisato knelt slightly in front of her, picking up the fallen milk carton and placing it on the table. He took out some tissues and wiped up the spilled milk. Meeting her fragile gaze, he gently tucked her stray bangs behind her ear. I just need to step out to call my homeroom teacher and ask for leave. I'll be right back. I'll stay with you here for as long as you need. Kazusa looked into his eyes. Unable to argue, she silently withdrew her hand and nodded. After making sure she was settled, Chisato turned and left the room. Cough. Cough, cough. 2 minutes later, Kazusa heard a weak coughing sound from the hospital bed. Her eyes widened. After a brief moment of shock, she quickly rushed to the bedside. Mom, how are you feeling? Her voice, usually cold and composed, now carried an edge of urgency and hoarseness. It was no surprise she had been running a fever the day before, and she had just cried so much. Recalling the doctor's instructions, she quickly pressed the call button at the bedside to notify the medical staff. Mom. Haha. Cough. It's been a long time since I've heard you call me that so gently. Even in her extreme weakness, the moment Yuko saw her daughter's worried face, she couldn't help but tease her first. But this time, Kazusa didn't respond as she usually would, snapping back with her usual bluntness. Some things only become clear when you're on the verge of losing them, only then do you realize just how much space they occupy in your life. Kazusa's eyes welled up again. She clutched her mother's hand and pressed it against her cheek. Her mother no longer carried the familiar scent of her usual perfume. Instead, she smelled of medicine and disinfectant. She hated that smell. Idiot. What are you crying for all of a sudden? Yuko gently pulled her hand away and, after several attempts, finally managed to reach out and wipe the tears from Kazusa's eyes. Help me raise the bed a little. I want to sit up for a bit. Kazusa swallowed her emotions and pressed the button to slowly incline the upper half of the bed. Then she adjusted the pillow so her mother could sit more comfortably. Once everything was settled, Yuko turned her gaze toward the window. The sky outside was clear and bright. White clouds drifted across a vivid blue backdrop, while trees swayed gently in the breeze, full of life. It was a beautiful day. She longed to go outside and enjoy it, but given her current condition, she doubted she'd be allowed to. When did you get here, Kazusa? Last night, around 8. And Miyako? She told me everything. Kazusa bit her lip. Why didn't you tell me sooner? If I told you, you'd just worry too. You should just focus on enjoying your school life. But I'm your daughter. Kazusa's emotions surged again. The fragile composure she had just regained threatened to collapse once more. Yuko fell silent, staring at her for a long moment before finally forcing a faint smile. Sorry. Seeing her mother like this, Kazusa felt another sharp pain in her chest. Just then, the hospital room door swung open. Dr. Takanagi, dressed in a white coat, strode in quickly, followed by Miyako. Kazusa let go of her mother's hand and stepped aside, feeling somewhat at a loss as she made way for the doctor. Dr. Takanagi asked a few questions, and Yuko answered them one by one. After a brief exchange, the doctor turned to Kazusa and Miyako, motioning for them to follow him outside. All right, Normasa-kun, there's no need to hide anything from me. Yuko took a shallow breath. Just tell me right here, how much time do I have left? She asked in a half-joking manner. But Normasa's expression turned so grave that it filled the room with unease. Chapter 315, Chance of Success. Facing Yuko's gaze, which was half pleading and half determined, Dr. Takanagi finally spoke the truth. Yuko, your condition has worsened. The leukemia cells have developed resistance to the current treatment, allowing them to proliferate rapidly in your bone marrow. As a result, your internal organs will suffer even more severe damage in the coming days. He avoided using overly technical medical terms and explained in a way that everyone present could understand. The leukemia cells are attacking your organs, causing them to deteriorate and malfunction. This means your body could experience various issues: fever, headaches, chest pain, joint pain, unnatural swelling and bruising, sudden bleeding from your gums or nose. These symptoms will only worsen over time. Right now, you're still able to breathe on your own through sheer willpower, but soon, you may need to be transferred to the Ecchi and rely on a ventilator just to breathe properly. Yuko, you need to be mentally prepared for this. Hearing these words, Kazusa staggered. Fortunately, Miko reacted quickly and caught her, preventing her from collapsing onto the floor. Yuko took a trembling deep breath. The treatment had been showing good results until now. She had even dared to hope that her condition would continue improving. Had she been too naive? Dr. Takanagi, even if you say that, there must still be a way to cure the president, right? Miko's eyes were moist as she desperately sought a glimmer of hope in the doctor's words. Kazusa, too, held her breath and stared at him intently. Normasa nodded. Of course. The root cause of leukemia is bone marrow failure, which leads to an excessive production of abnormal blood cells that cannot function properly. In this case, if a bone marrow transplant is successful, Yuko's condition could improve significantly. Both Yuko and Miko understood what he meant. The doctor had used the word improve instead of cure. In other words, even if the bone marrow transplant were successful, Yuko would never fully regain her previous health. Then, what is the success rate of this procedure? Miko's voice trembled as she asked. Normasa fixed his gaze on Yuko and remained silent for a long time. As a doctor, he had delivered tragic news to many families throughout his career. No matter how many patients or their loved ones broke down in tears, he had always maintained his professionalism, bowing slightly and saying, "Please stay strong," before turning and leaving the ward. He never let himself feel sadness over such moments. At most, he felt a faint sense of regret. Because as a seasoned doctor, he knew he had to keep a clear mind and not let emotions affect his duty to other patients. But this time, he wavered. Though now in middle age with a family of his own, seeing the woman he once admired in his youth lying weakly on a hospital bed, looking as though she might disappear at any moment, made his heart ache unbearably. For the first time, he could truly empathize with the grieving families he had encountered in the past. Considering Yuko's current condition, organ function, immune response, the transplant process, potential complications, and the genetic compatibility between the donor and the recipient, the success rate is about 30%. Normasa lowered his gaze to the floor, unable to continue looking into Yuko's eyes. He feared seeing disappointment, helplessness, or fear in her expression. He had once confidently assured her that he would cure her. But now, all he could offer was a hesitant and uncertain answer. Even the 30% he mentioned was an optimistic estimate. If he were to be completely objective, the actual success rate would be closer to 20% or perhaps even lower. Mom. Kazusa clung to the edge of Yuko's hospital bed, letting out quiet sobs. Miko covered her mouth and turned to face the window. Normasa watched as Yuko weakly lifted her hand to stroke her daughter's head. His chest tightened painfully. Yuko, get some rest. The nurses will bring your medication later. Take it and try to sleep. I'll go discuss the surgical details with the other doctors. With that, he turned to leave. Normasa-kun. Yuko called out to him. A few coughs interrupted her words, but when she spoke again, her voice was still gentle. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Normasa hesitated for a moment, then left the room without looking back. After going through the trouble of requesting leave from his homeroom teacher, Chisato ended the call and happened to pass by the doctor in the hallway. Before he could open the door to the hospital room, he heard Kazusa's stifled sobs. Her sorrowful cries felt like a serrated blade, sawing painfully at his heart. He also heard Yuko's voice. After a moment of hesitation, he finally knocked on the door and entered after receiving permission. I'm so glad, Suzumiya-kun, you came to see me too. Yuko turned to look at him. Like the last time they met, she wore a smile. But in her current frail state, that smile no longer held the warmth it once did. Instead, it only deepened the sorrow of those who saw it. You came at just the right time. Hurry and take your crybaby girlfriend away from me. No matter how much I try, I can't comfort her. Only you can handle this now. Chisato nodded, walked over to the bedside, and took Kazusa's hand. He led her to the room's private bathroom. When they came out, her tears had been wiped away, and she had changed out of her pajamas into casual clothes. All right, stop looking so sad. Don't act like I'm going to die tomorrow, it's such a mood killer. Suzumiya-kun, take Kazusa out for a walk. I need to have a private conversation with Miko. Following Yuko's instructions, Chisato took the silent and deeply depressed Kazusa to the grassy area inside the hospital. Having gone nearly a whole day without sleep, the harsh sunlight made her feel a bit dazed. Chisato found a bench under the shade of a tree and pulled her to sit down beside him. Chapter 316, Not My Daughter, But Me? The doctor said that my mom's surgery has only a 30% success rate. I used to be really angry that she left me alone in this country, blaming her for focusing only on her worldwide performances and neglecting my existence. But I was never really worried because I knew that no matter where she went, she would always come back to me in the end. But now, I don't know if I'll ever see her again. If possible, I'd rather she stayed just like before, running around the world freely. Even if she never comes back, that's fine, as long as I know she's truly happy. Kazusa began speaking softly. As she talked, she gazed far into the distance at the sky. Rather than speaking to Chisato, it felt more like she was talking to herself, whispering words meant only for her own ears. So, Chisato remained silent. He simply held her hand tightly and looked into her eyes. Before she knew it, Kazusa had leaned her head against her boyfriend's shoulder. Worry and exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Slowly, she closed her eyes. Even in sleep, she didn't seem completely freed from the cruel reality. Her eyelids fluttered occasionally, and her lips moved faintly, mumbling something incomprehensible. Chisato, feeling a pang of heartache, gently kissed the corner of her eye and carefully pulled her into his embrace, allowing her to rest more comfortably against him. He glanced toward the direction of Yuko's hospital room, lost in thought for a moment before refocusing. Before him, something appeared, an interface that only he could see, the Pure Love System panel. With a single thought, a small pill materialized in the palm of his hand. This was the panacea, something he had worked hard to obtain. The detailed description of this Pure Love System item read, as long as there's still a breath left in you, even late-stage cancer can be cured. What's a medical miracle? Tactical Backclean.jpg. He had acquired this just in case of emergencies, and now, it seemed the time had came to use it. The sooner Aunt Yuko took it, the sooner she would recover, and the sooner Kazusa would be freed from this pain. By around 6 p.m., Chisato was pacing back and forth in the hospital corridor. He kept glancing at Yuko's hospital room, feeling increasingly frustrated as nurses went in and out to take care of her. Kazusa, too, had been glued to her mother's side ever since waking from her short nap that afternoon. She only left briefly when she needed to use the restroom. With things like this, there was no way he could get the panacea into Yuko's mouth. Explaining the situation directly was out of the question. Matters involving the system were something he had no intention of telling anyone. He planned to take that secret to his grave. Chisato was growing anxious, but there wasn't much he could do. All he could do was silently wait for the right opportunity. The chance came after 10 p.m. It was getting late, and Moko took the initiative to say her goodbyes. She was indeed worried about Yuko's condition, but someone had to handle the piled-up work at the office. After she left, there was one less person in the room. Now, the only ones staying with Yuko were him and Kazusa. A nurse came in once to take her temperature and record her condition. Based on Chisato's observations, the next visit wouldn't be for another hour. And Yuko was already fast asleep after taking her prescribed medicine. That meant that if he could find a way to get Kazusa to step out or fall asleep, he'd be able to slip the panacea into Aunt Yuko's mouth. With that in mind, Chisato walked up to Kazusa and put an arm around her shoulders. Kazusa, you've been watching over Aunt Yuko all day. Why don't you lie down on the small bed over there and rest for a while? I'll stay with her for a bit. Kazusa turned to look at her boyfriend and forced a smile. After her short nap in the afternoon, she was feeling a little better. It's okay, Chisato. You should sleep first. I just want to stay with my mom a little longer. After all, chances like this might not come again. It's exactly because you've been staying here all day that the thing you fear might really happen. Chisato was helpless, but he couldn't say that out loud. If Kazusa wasn't willing to sleep, he had to come up with another way. So, he subtly began persuading her to drink more water. It was a simple, even stupid method, but it worked. 40 minutes later, Kazusa got up and walked to the bathroom inside the room. Chisato glanced at the time. The nurse wouldn't be back for another 10 minutes. This was the perfect chance. As soon as Kazusa shut the bathroom door, he swiftly approached Yuko's hospital bed, pulled the small panacea pill from his pocket, and moved close to her lips. He thought feeding her the pill would be an easy task, but in reality, it turned out to be far more difficult than he expected. Yuko, perhaps due to her illness, had tightly pursed her lips and clenched her teeth in her sleep. Her mouth was shut so firmly that he couldn't get the pill inside at all. There was no other choice. Hygiene be damned. Chisato carefully used his fingers to pry open her lips while watching her expression intently. If she showed any signs of waking up, he would immediately stop. Fortunately, Everything went smoothly. No unexpected interruptions. Slowly, Chisato managed to part her lips. He wasted no time and quickly tossed the panacea into her mouth. As expected of an item from the system, the moment it came into contact with saliva, it instantly dissolved. This should be fine now. He just had to wait for the medicine to take effect. Chisato quickly took a step back before Kazusa could come out of the bathroom. However, as his gaze lingered on Yuko's slightly open mouth, he hesitated for a moment. Thinking it might be suspicious, he returned to the bedside and carefully closed her lips. And at that moment Yuko's eyes snapped open. Her sharp, clear gaze was nothing like that of a sick person. It locked directly onto Chisato's flustered eyes. Their current posture made it look as if Chisato was about to kiss her. Yuko looked at the boy before her, feeling the warmth and touch of his fingers on her lips. She let out a slow, knowing smile and teased, "Well, this is unexpected, Suzumiya-kun. So, you're interested in me rather than my daughter?" Chisato swiftly pulled his hand away, his face turning red. He stood by the bedside, struggling to find words. After a long moment, he finally managed to squeeze out an "No, Aunt Yuko. You were sleeping with your mouth open. And snoring." Chapter 317. It worked. As soon as Chisato spoke those words, the air in the hospital room froze for a moment. Yuko averted her gaze from Chisato's face. It was clear that she hadn't expected such an answer, and as a result, she looked a bit uneasy. Fortunately, a sound from the other side of the hospital room broke the awkward atmosphere. Kazusa pushed open the door and walked out of the bathroom. Seeing that her mother was awake, she quickly approached her. "Mom, are you feeling unwell? Or do you want some water or something to eat?" Yuko shook her head and, almost imperceptibly, glanced at Chisato. She didn't mention what had just happened. "I've been sleeping for so long that I feel groggy. Help me up so I can walk around a bit." "But Dr. Takanagi said you need bed rest and shouldn't go outside." "Then I'll just walk around inside. I don't want to keep lying down anymore." This time, Kazusa didn't refuse her mother's request. She carefully lifted the blanket and supported Yuko's back, helping her sit up. Meanwhile, Chisato also came over to help, moving her legs to the side of the bed. As he was crouching down to put slippers on her feet, Yuko suddenly froze for some reason. She first looked at her daughter, who was draping a coat over her, then lowered her gaze and stared at Chisato. Her expression gradually became one of disbelief mixed with something subtle and complex. That expression, at first faint, became increasingly evident. But the reason for it wasn't what had happened when she first woke up, the seemingly rude action Chisato had taken. After all, he was the beloved boyfriend of her precious daughter. Maybe his actions just now were unintentional. Perhaps a bug had landed on her lips in the hospital room. No, that was unlikely. In a high-end hospital room like this, insects shouldn't appear. The place was sterilized and disinfected daily. There was no space for them to survive. Then it was probably a piece of lint or something that had stuck to her lips, and Chisato had just reached out to remove it. It just so happened that she woke up at that exact moment, leading to the misunderstanding. In any case, even though Yuko was already at the age of motherhood, she still had that son-dear heart of a young girl. There was no way she would accept Chisato's so-called explanation about snoring. But what is happening now? The heavy, suffocating pressure in her chest was gone. The constant, dull pain in her head had also vanished in an instant. It felt like that exhilarating relief after a long, playful night during a vacation in Hawaii, waking up naturally the next morning, completely refreshed. Not only that, but the areas where she had felt intense pain from the slightest touch, her shoulders and joints, were now completely free of discomfort. To be honest, when she saw their movements, she had already prepared herself to grit her teeth and endure the pain so she wouldn't make them worried. But in the end, she felt their gentle touch without any pain at all. It didn't hurt. At all. Chisato had been so careful that when his fingers touched her ankle, she even felt a slight tickle. "Kazusa, Chisato, could you let go for a moment?" The unusual sensations she was experiencing made Yuko widen her eyes in realization. A possibility crossed her mind. Ever since she was diagnosed with leukemia, she had constantly fantasized about this possibility, wishing it could come true. But she was a firm materialist. She understood that miracles born from imagination would never happen in this world, let alone to her. Yet now, what she had longingly gazed out the window and daydreamed about countless times while lying on her hospital bed had actually happened. Her first reaction was shock. Then, she forcefully suppressed the excitement rising within her, eager to confirm it for herself. But her reaction only made Kazusa worry. She hesitated before withdrawing her hands cautiously. "Mom, did we hurt you?" Yuko shook her head. "No, I just want to stand up by myself." She didn't explain further. She wasn't in the mood for that right now. Her full attention was on sensing her own body. Once Chisato also stepped back, Yuko pressed her hands against the bed. She took a deep, almost trembling breath, then moved her legs forward. The moment her feet, clad in slippers, touched the ground, they felt steady. Then, engaging her leg muscles and core, she exerted a little force and effortlessly stood up by the window. Throughout the process, her body showed no issues. Every organ and joint worked in perfect harmony. The parts that used to resist even the slightest movement with excruciating pain didn't send back any negative signals at all. Yuko looked down and raised her hands. She curled her fingers into fists and opened them again, repeating the motion slowly and mechanically. Even with the 4 needle still inserted in her left hand, she ignored it. "Mom." Kazusa anxiously stepped closer, wanting to say something but hesitating. She didn't understand why her mother was acting so strangely all of a sudden. The expression on her face was too complicated to read. Seeing this, Chisato finally felt completely at ease. There was no doubt the miracle drug had worked. Yuko no longer had to suffer from illness. And Kazusa no longer had to endure the sorrow and pain. At that moment, the nurse pushed open the door and walked in. When she saw Yuko standing straight beside the bed, she immediately rushed over in a panic. "Misan. You shouldn't be getting out of bed in your condition." Yuko snapped out of her thoughts and slowly took a deep breath. She turned her head slightly, not responding to the nurse, but instead asking on her own, "Is Dr. Takanagi still in the hospital?" The nurse was momentarily stunned. She had been caring for Yuko for a while now. But ever since she was hospitalized, not once had she seen her looking so full of energy, her complexion so healthy, her entire presence radiating vitality. Could it be that having family by her side had improved her mood? Chapter 318, Miracle in Medical Field. Dr. Takanagi is currently in a meeting with the other doctors, discussing your treatment plan. I see. Yuko glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. It was already close to 11, and he still hadn't gone home. Well, that worked out just fine. Please hurry and call him over. I feel like something is off with my body, very off. Yuko emphasized her words, making the nurse panic. She had originally come in with medicine, but she no longer had time to administer it. She placed the medicine on the table beside the bed and rushed out of the room. "Mom, are you not feeling well?" Kazusa had also heard what her mother had just said. She misunderstood and was now a bit frightened. "It's fine, Kazusa. It seems like the medicine Dr. Takanagi prescribed is working. I feel a lot better now." "Then why did you have the nurse call him?" "Of course, I also want to tell him about this in person. Maybe it will be helpful for my future treatment." Kazusa let out a small sigh of relief. Yuko gently patted her daughter's head and then shifted her gaze to Chisato, who was standing nearby, smiling. Her eyes narrowed slightly. This is impossible." Normasa held the latest medical report on Yuko's condition in his hand. At this moment, he seriously questioned his own eyesight, or perhaps the hospital's diagnostic equipment had malfunctioned. Otherwise, there was simply no way to explain the results he was looking at. Inside the hospital room, Kazusa, overcome with tension, tightly grasped Chisato's hand. Meanwhile, Yuko, who had returned to lying back against the head of the bed, was the one to break the silence. "Explain yourself, Normasa-kun. What do you mean by impossible?" Normasa shook his head again, pressing his lips together tightly without answering. He walked to the other side of the room, flipping through multiple test reports, muttering to himself as he did so, "White blood cell count normal. Hemoglobin index normal. Platelet count normal. But how is this possible? How could this be?" The situation unfolding before his eyes completely overturned everything he had come to understand as a doctor. It felt as though the worldview he had spent the first half of his life constructing was now crumbling before him. Just a few hours ago, Yuko's body had been overrun by leukemia cells, proliferating at an alarming rate, suppressing normal blood production, and relentlessly attacking her organs. That was why she had been experiencing spontaneous bleeding from her mouth and nose, as well as severe, uncontrollable pain throughout her body. But now, those mutated white blood cells, they had all disappeared. The test results were entirely normal, as if those cancerous cells had never existed in Yuko's body at all. And that wasn't all. The damage they had caused, the swelling of her liver and spleen, the functional impairments of her lungs and kidneys had also completely vanished. Not only that, but those organs had somehow miraculously healed themselves. They were now functioning normally, working just as they should. But, just as he had blurted out earlier, how is this possible? For someone to recover to this extent in just a matter of hours, it was absurd. Humans weren't earthworms, they didn't possess such an exaggerated ability to regenerate. The more he understood about this field of medicine, the more baffling this phenomenon became. "Hey! Normasa-kun, stop muttering to yourself like that. Just tell me, what do the test results say? How is my body?" Yuko's voice snapped Normasa back to reality. She even sounded energetic now. He stepped closer to her, signaling for her to open her mouth so he could check her oral condition. Then, he pressed down on her shoulders and knees to conduct an examination. "Do you feel any pain where I just pressed?" "Not at all." Normasa withdrew his hands, staring at Yuko in complete silence once again. After another prompt from her, he called a nurse to take a blood sample and requested that it be sent to another hospital for testing as soon as possible. After that, he asked Chisato and Kazusa to leave the room, leaving him alone with Yuko. "I've never seen you so shaken before." Yuko pressed a cotton ball against her arm where the blood had been drawn. "Alright, now that no one else is here, can you finally tell me what's going on?" Normasa sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed his fingers against his forehead, massaging it lightly. "I don't even know how to explain this. This is something that shouldn't be possible in reality, and yet it happened. If you keep stalling, I'll kick you." Seeing his earlier reactions, Yuko was growing impatient. She knew her own body best, and a possibility had already formed in her mind. Now, she just needed Normasa to confirm it. If the test results are accurate, your current condition could only be described as a miracle. Yuko's lips trembled slightly. "Speak clearly. The cancerous white blood cells in your body have disappeared. Your organs have also returned to a completely healthy state. In other words, you are now perfectly healthy." Thump, 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 thump. As those words left his mouth, Yuko's heartbeat accelerated. She was healthy. Yes, she felt incredible right now. There wasn't a single trace of discomfort in her body, and the test results confirmed it. That meant the bone marrow transplant surgery we talked about before. You don't need it anymore, Yuko. Your body has fully recovered. There's no need for any surgery. Then, why did this happen so suddenly? Was it the medication you prescribed for me? Normasa let out a bitter laugh. The medication I gave you could only suppress your condition, it could never completely cure you. The fact that you've fully recovered, I have no way of explaining it. You're my attending physician. If you can't explain it, then who am I supposed to ask? Who knows? Maybe it really is divine intervention. Divine intervention. Yuko silently repeated those words in her mind. Of course, she was overjoyed about her recovery, but she was never one to leave questions unanswered. If there was something she didn't understand, she would pursue it to the very end. And now that she had finally calmed down a little, she suddenly remembered something she had overlooked earlier. When she had first opened her eyes, Chisato had been very close to her, his fingers resting against her lips. At that moment, just what had he been doing? Chapter 319, Is it him? Yuko had a dream. In her dream, she was attacked by nightmares that had taken the form of her illness. They circled around her with menacing claws and sharp fangs, tearing at her and biting her flesh, inflicting unbearable pain. She tried desperately to fight back, but it was futile. Her strength was too feeble, she couldn't escape their encirclement, nor could she change the situation even slightly. All she could do was instinctively curl up, hoping to slow the collapse of her body. Then, suddenly, the dark sky was torn open by a burst of radiant light, shining directly down upon her. The nightmares let out ear-piercing shrieks as they disintegrated into black smoke and vanished. Covered in wounds, she gazed at the brilliant light, only to feel an abrupt sensation of weightlessness. Her footing gave way, and she plunged into a body of water that was incomparably warm. The panic within her quickly faded. To her astonishment, she realized that the excruciating pain that had racked her body was gone. The water enveloping her entire being flowed gently across her limbs and bones, as if it were healing her. She surrendered to the sensation, and in the midst of this soothing experience, she gradually lost consciousness and closed her eyes. When she slowly reopened them, the dream had ended, and she had returned to reality. The first thing she saw was a young man standing just inches away from her. And his fingers were touching the inside of her lower lip and her teeth. Given that he was her daughter's boyfriend, Yuko's initial reaction was that their current posture might be a little inappropriate. So, after a brief moment of thought, she didn't dwell on it and, true to her usual nature, made a playful remark. But thinking about it now, Yuko couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed a crucial opportunity. If she had seized his wrist at that moment and gazed into his eyes with utmost seriousness, wouldn't she have caught him off guard and forced him to reveal a slip, one that could have clued her in on the meaning behind his actions? What exactly had he been doing to her mouth? Her body had completely healed in just a matter of hours. Could it have been because of him? Could this unbelievable, miraculous event have happened to her because of something he did? Thinking back carefully, Moko, Ohara-san, even Kazusa, when they first entered the hospital room and saw her, each of them looked utterly grief-stricken. Their faces were filled with sorrow. But as for Chisato, he hadn't shown any particularly unusual reactions. His demeanor was similar to the others. He spoke a few words to her by the bedside. Yet, for some reason, Yuko couldn't shake the feeling that, unlike the others, he wasn't truly grieving for her from the bottom of his heart. After speaking with her, he naturally stepped aside to give Kazusa space. He stood by the bedside, his brows slightly furrowed, gazing out the window into the distance almost as if something was troubling him. What had been on his mind? Had her illness inconvenienced him? Or was he troubled by something else? For instance, perhaps he knew how to improve her condition, but because others were present, he had been trying to figure out how to get everyone to leave so he could be alone with her. And conveniently, it would be best if she were unconscious at that moment. Something like that. Yuko furrowed her brows and rubbed her temples. Most of what she was thinking about now was just speculation, and it might not mean anything. She also understood that if things were really as she suspected, if Chisato had indeed played a role in her miraculous recovery, then even if she confronted him again, he would likely just brush it off with another excuse, just as he had done before. Even so, Yuko was desperate to uncover the truth behind her sudden recovery. For those who wronged her, she believed in repaying them tenfold. And for those who saved her life, if it really was Chisato who helped her, there was no way she would let him enjoy the satisfaction of being a hidden hero all on his own. It would be difficult, but with the right approach, uncovering the truth wasn't impossible. After Dr. Takanagi left the hospital room, it was already past 3 in the morning. Yuko turned her head, glancing at Kazusa sleeping soundly on the accompanying bed. Then, she looked at Chisato, wrapped snugly in a blanket and fast asleep on the sofa. A gentle smile appeared on her lips. Early the next morning, the results from the blood tests Dr. Takanagi had requested from other hospitals the night before were delivered to his email inbox in the form of electronic documents. At that moment, he had been dozing off at his desk in the attending physician's office. The ringing of his phone startled him awake. He adjusted his glasses, answered the call while expressing his thanks, and quickly moved his mouse to open his inbox. There were multiple test reports from different hospitals, and he meticulously reviewed them one by one. At the end of it, he leaned back in his chair, his face blank with disbelief. In the span of just a few hours, his entire worldview had shattered, then reconstructed, and then shattered once more. What the hell? Everything I've learned about medicine over the past few decades. What does it even mean now? Normasa muttered self-mockingly. But after a few minutes, he ultimately removed his glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose, and let out a wry smile. No matter what, if his crumbling worldview meant that Yuko was cured, then it was a trade well worth making. The reports from the other hospitals weren't much different from the one from his own hospital the night before. This confirmed that just yesterday, Yuko had still been suffering from leukemia, with severe organ damage. Even if a bone marrow transplant had been performed, the chances of success were only around 20%. And even if the surgery succeeded, her remaining lifespan due to rejection reactions, organ failure, and other complications was theoretically less than 5 years. But now, she has made a full recovery. And it had happened within mere hours. At this point, there was no use dwelling on it anymore. What mattered most was delivering this joyous news to Yuko and her family as soon as possible. Normasa stood up, walked to the door, and rubbed his greasy face. After thinking for a moment, he turned around and headed for the bathroom. He might as well wash his face before going. Meanwhile, in the hospital room, after Yuko woke up, Chisato pulled back the curtains, while Kazusa took the breakfast porridge brought by the nurse and carefully fed her mother by the window. Given Yuko's current physical condition, not to mention drinking porridge, she could easily get out of bed, do several sets of squats, and even jump rope. However, she deliberately chose not to reveal this, enjoying her daughter's rare display of attentiveness, something she had never experienced before. This was also part of the plan she intended to execute. Chapter 320, CCTV recording. Chisato went into the bathroom to freshen up. Taking advantage of this moment, Yuko shook her head slightly, signaling that she didn't want any more porridge. She then softly asked Kazusa, about Chisato-kun. After I fell asleep last night, did you two secretly get intimate here? She deliberately started the conversation with such an ambiguous topic, intending to conceal her true objective. It wasn't that she didn't trust her daughter, but Yuko understood Kazusa's personality well. She wasn't unintelligent, but she was too simple-minded. If Kazusa carelessly mentioned this conversation to her boyfriend later, it might make him more vigilant, which was not what Yuko wanted. By starting with such an intimate topic, there was no need to worry. Unlike her mother, Kazusa wasn't as open-minded and would absolutely never discuss such things with her boyfriend. Just as Yuko expected, the moment Kazusa heard the word intimate, her face turned slightly red. Since her mother was a patient, she refrained from arguing back like she usually would and instead responded in a much milder tone, "Mom, you're still in this condition. How could I possibly be in the mood for that? In other words, if I were just suffering from a common cold, would you be in the mood? Don't twist my words. Also, Mom, you should really focus on resting right now instead of thinking about such nonsense." How can my own daughter's love life be considered nonsense? Yuko smiled, then smoothly steered the conversation toward the information she truly wanted to know. If you weren't getting intimate last night, then what were you two doing? What could we possibly do here? It was just normal stuff. I stayed by your side, and when the nurse came in, I helped her take your temperature and such. And what about Chisato-kun? He's a teenage boy. Shouldn't he be thinking about being close to his girlfriend at all times? Don't project your past experiences onto Chisato. If only he were as passionate as you say. Kazusa thought to herself. Even when we stayed at a hotel together before, he didn't lay a finger on me. Kazusa placed the unfinished porridge on the bedside table and continued, as for him, he wasn't just sitting around doing nothing. When he saw that I hadn't eaten much during the day, he left the room at night to buy me some snacks from the vending machine. Then, when he saw that I was getting thirsty, he kept pouring me water several times. I see. Yuko didn't obtain any concrete information from her daughter. However, given her preconceived suspicions, she couldn't help but connect some of what Kazusa just said with her own thoughts. For instance, perhaps Chisato deliberately bought snacks that would make Kazusa thirsty, thereby ensuring she kept drinking water, which in turn increased her chances of going to the restroom. That way, he could create more opportunities to be alone with Yuko. But ultimately, this was just speculation. She still lacked solid evidence. While she was deep in thought, Chisato finished washing up and stepped out of the bathroom. Yuko smiled at him and casually asked him to turn on the television. Shortly after, Normasa entered the hospital room. He was smiling warmly, just about to say something when Yuko slightly shook her head, stopping him. Normasa immediately understood and turned to Kazusa and Chisato. Apologies, but could you two step outside for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with Yuko in private. Since they weren't just doctor and patient but also old acquaintances, Chisato had no objections. Kazusa, though slightly displeased, still allowed her boyfriend to lead her out of the room. Once the two of them had left, Normasa spoke. Yuko, congratulations. We can now confirm that your body has completely recovered. So it really is true. Yuko murmured to herself, then looked at him seriously. Normasa-kun, I need you to do me a favor. Normasa nodded. What is it? There are surveillance cameras in my hospital room, right? That's right. They're linked to the fire alarm system and positioned directly toward your bed. Under normal circumstances, hospital rooms wouldn't have surveillance cameras, as that would be an invasion of privacy. However, this hospital wasn't a typical public facility. Its fees were significantly higher than those of standard hospitals, meaning that most of its patients were either wealthy or influential. Years ago, an elderly patient had been admitted here. Due to a dispute over inheritance, one of his sons grew resentful. One night, the son secretly visited his father to renegotiate the inheritance. However, when things didn't go as he wished, he lost his temper and smothered his father with a pillow. It took 3 whole months of police investigation before the truth was uncovered. During that time, the son, like a true hypocrite, accused the hospital of negligence, claiming that their poor care had led to his father's sudden death. He even attempted to sue the hospital for compensation. For those 3 months, the hospital was engulfed in controversy, its reputation taking a severe hit. Fortunately, when the truth came to light, the hospital was finally cleared of any wrongdoing. After that incident, in order to prevent similar occurrences and to provide security for other patients, the hospital installed surveillance cameras in its rooms. Every admitted patient was informed of this and required to sign a related agreement before their stay. Yuko had signed such an agreement when she was admitted, so she knew for a fact that her room had a surveillance camera. But Kazusa and Chisato had no idea. They wouldn't have expected that a private hospital room would have a surveillance camera. And this was the key to uncovering the truth. I wonder if the kind soul who cured me was truly so meticulous, so clever that they managed to avoid exposing a single flaw, even under the watchful eye of a surveillance camera. I want the surveillance footage of my hospital room from last night, every single minute of it. Yuko made her request. Normasa was no fool. After a brief moment of thought, he understood what she was implying. You suspect that your recovery wasn't a miracle of your own making, but rather that someone did something to you? Exactly. Rather than believing in some vague and illusory deities, I'd rather believe that there are people in this world with extraordinary abilities. That's not necessarily any easier to accept than the former. That depends on perspective. So, Normasa-kun, you'll help me, right? Normasa let out a bitter smile. I would love to help you, but I'm a doctor. Surveillance footage falls under the jurisdiction of the hospital's security department. I have no authority over it. Yuko smiled faintly, showing no sign of disappointment. That may be true, but as the highly esteemed head of the hospital's medical department, I'm sure you can find a way. You. Normasa shook his head with a helpless chuckle and stood up. Don't get your hopes up too much. I can't guarantee success. Got it. Just don't make me wait too long. Normasa turned and left. As he did, Kazusa, who had been waiting outside, pushed the door open and walked in. She looked at her mother with concern, asking what she had just discussed with the doctor. Yuko calmly stroked her daughter's head and smiled, brushing it off as an unimportant conversation about the past. Chapter 321, It is him. Around 2 p.m., Normasa returned to the hospital room. Kazusa, I suddenly have a craving for pudding. Yuko's request came out of nowhere. Kazusa immediately refused. Mom, until we're certain about your condition, you should hold off for now. Although Dr. Takanagi had mentioned last night that her mother's condition seemed to have fully recovered, he had also added that there was a possibility of a machine malfunction causing the abnormal results. In the morning, Normasa had only shared the latest test results with Yuko alone, leaving Kazusa still feeling anxious and uncertain. At this moment, Normasa cleared his throat and interjected. Given Yuko's current condition, a little bit of pudding shouldn't be an issue. Since even the doctor said so, there was no way to argue further. I'll go buy it. Yuko-san, what flavor would you like? Chisato spoke up voluntarily. From earlier, his phone had been buzzing in his pocket from time to time, likely messages from the various girls around him. Yuko's request had conveniently provided him with an excuse to step away from Kazusa and avoid dealing with those messages, a perfect opportunity he couldn't pass up. Get a variety of flavors. Also, pick up some grapes from the fruit store. Thank you, Suzumiya-kun. I'll reimburse you when you get back. No need. I rushed here yesterday and didn't bring any get-well gifts. Consider this making up for it. Just as Chisato was about to leave, Kazusa grabbed his wrist. I'll go with you. No need, Kazusa. Someone should stay with Yuko-san. You keep her company, I'll be back soon. Hearing this, Kazusa nodded and said no more. Chisato left the hospital room, successfully sent away as per Yuko's plan. This hospital was located far from the city center. Once outside the hospital gates, one had to walk quite a distance to reach the shopping district. Buying pudding from a store, then heading to a fruit shop for grapes, factoring in both the time spent shopping and the walk there and back, it would take at least half an hour. That was plenty of time. However, there was still one uninformed person left in the room. Yuko used the same old trick, looking at her daughter. Kazusa, could you step outside for a bit? I have something to discuss with Dr. Takanagi. This time, Kazusa didn't obediently leave like she had in the morning. She looked skeptical, her gaze shifting between Normasa and her mother. I already felt something was off this morning. Mom, is there something going on between you and Dr. Takanagi? You keep trying to send me away to talk in private. There's nothing like that, Kazusa. Is it your condition? Has something worsened? The sudden thought struck her, making her immediately anxious. She turned to Normasa, her emotions growing more intense. Dr. Takanagi, is that it? Normasa raised a hand but hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Yuko sighed, feeling a headache coming on. It's not what you think, Kazusa, then let me stay. Stop keeping secrets from me. You already hid it from me once. If it weren't for Miss Miko calling me, I wouldn't have even known how serious your condition had gotten. Kazusa had long been upset with her mother for hiding her illness. She had kept those feelings to herself before because she didn't want to add to the burden of a sick mother, forcing her to worry about Kazusa's emotions on top of enduring her illness. But now, yet again, her mother was trying to push her away, keeping things from her. This time, Kazusa couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing her daughter's emotional outburst, Yuko smiled, a mix of frustration and affection. Normasa also spoke up. Yuko, Kazusa is your daughter. It's okay for her to know, isn't it? Indeed, there should be no secrets between a mother and her daughter. But Yuko didn't want Kazusa to know the truth behind her miraculous recovery. She had her own concerns. However, under these circumstances, it seemed impossible to keep hiding it. She could only hope that what she feared wouldn't come to pass in the future. I understand. Yuko compromised. She beckoned with her hand, and the sulking Kazusa quickly suppressed her dissatisfaction and sat beside her. What I'm about to discuss with Dr. Takanagi is extremely important. If you can promise to sit here quietly, no matter what we talk about, and keep your curiosity in check without interrupting, then I'll let you stay. I promise. Hearing her mother words, Kazusa nodded immediately, like a chick pecking at grains. All right, that settles it. Yuko withdrew her hand from patting her daughter's head and looked toward Normasa Takanagi. Let's get started as soon as possible. I hope we can finish before Suzumiya-kun returns. Normasa Takanagi nodded, turned to lock the hospital room door, then walked over to the television. He took out a USB drive from his pocket, plugged it in, and picked up the remote to operate something. Meanwhile, Kazusa was filled with questions. Strange. Aren't they supposed to be discussing Mom's condition? What are they going to watch? Since she had already promised her mother, Kazusa could only suppress her confusion and fix her gaze on the television. As the screen displayed the footage, her initial doubts were soon answered. The TV screen showed a clear overhead view of the hospital bed, with the surrounding area gradually expanding outward. And lying in that bed was none other than her mother, Yuko. Kazusa also saw other familiar people on the screen. Miss Moko, Dr. Takanagi, herself, and Chisato. It was a surveillance recording from this very hospital room. Kazusa instinctively raised her head, searching for the camera's location. There was a camera in here? The timestamp in the bottom right corner of the screen indicated that this footage was from yesterday evening. Why is Mom watching this now? Mom. Kazusa couldn't hold back and was about to speak, but the moment she met her mother's serious gaze, she remembered her promise. Gritting her teeth, she shut her mouth and refrained from voicing her doubts. Now that her daughter had settled down, Yuko took the remote from Normasa. Chisato would return in about half an hour. She didn't have much time, but fortunately, the TV had a fast-forward function. She first set it to 2x speed, but finding it too slow, she silently increased it to 8x. At this speed, everyone in the hospital room moved in an absurdly fast manner. How can you see anything like this? Kazusa watched in complete confusion. Every time she wanted to say something, she glanced at her mother and Dr. Takanagi's solemn expressions and had no choice but to sit obediently and continue watching with them. But her curiosity only grew stronger. Suddenly, Yuko pressed a button, rewinding the footage and reducing the playback speed. At this point in the video, Normasa and Moko had already left, leaving only Yuko, Kazusa, Chisato, and the nurse. The nurse could be seen clearly, feeding Yuko her medication and giving some reminders before leaving with her tray. Due to the sedative in the medicine, Yuko soon closed her eyes. Kazusa initially stayed by her mother's side, but after Chisato whispered something to her, she stood up and left the bed, disappearing from the camera's view. Yuko paused the video and turned to her daughter. What did Suzumiya-kun say to you at that time? He asked if I wanted to wash my face, saying it might help me feel more awake. I see. Yuko didn't press further and resumed the playback. Since this involved Chisato, she disabled fast-forwarding. As they watched, Kazusa's eyes slowly widened in disbelief. Wait. Chisato, what are you trying to do to my mom? On the screen, as soon as Kazusa left, Chisato immediately leaned over the hospital bed, lowering his upper body toward the sleeping Yuko and reaching out with both hands. His actions made it blatantly clear that he was attempting something. From the overhead camera angle, the scene looked as if he was trying to steal a kiss from Yuko. Kazusa covered her mouth with her hands. Then, startled by a sudden noise, Chisato hurriedly withdrew, his panicked reaction making him seem all the more suspicious. The nurse reappeared in the frame she had returned to retrieve the thermometer she had forgotten earlier. Chisato spoke to her casually, as if nothing had happened. Kazusa was completely frozen. Normasa appeared deep in thought. Only Yuko seemed amused, a faint smile playing on her lips. She continued watching. Chisato didn't make any further moves, likely because Kazusa had returned. Some time later, Chisato left the room and came back carrying snacks. After handing some to Kazusa, he began pouring her water at an unusually frequent rate. At the time, Kazusa hadn't thought much of it, but now, watching the footage, she realized something was off. Sure enough, after watching herself drink too much water and head to the restroom, leaving the bedside, Chisato once again made his move. Just like before, he leaned in close to the sleeping Yuko, cautiously lowering his upper body and stretching out his hands. That bastard Kazusa, do you remember what I told you when I was teaching you piano? That you must always remain patient. Just as Kazusa was about to curse in frustration at realizing she had completely misjudged Chisato, Yuko interrupted her before she could finish. Remember what you just promised me? Be patient and watch till the end. Kazusa clenched her fists, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She recalled all her past interactions with Chisato and realized she might have overreacted. Suppressing her anger and doubts, she forced herself to keep watching. Then, the next moment, all three of them, Kazusa, Yuko, and Normasa, felt their hearts skip a beat at the same time. On the screen, Chisato's back blocked their view of his hands, making it impossible to see what he was doing. However, in a fleeting moment, something flashed on screen, a brief glimpse of Chisato's right hand, holding something pinched between his fingers. Yuko, rewind. Rewind. You don't need to tell me. Yuko rewound the footage to that exact moment. Kazusa and Yuko both leaned forward, widening their eyes in an attempt to see more clearly. Normasa even took a few steps closer, pressing up against the television screen. The three of them fell silent, staring at the image for several long seconds. Then, Yuko pressed play again, Now that they had identified what Chisato was holding, his actions no longer seemed so suspicious. With force, he pried open Yuko's mouth with his left hand. With his right hand, he placed the object inside. Then, he deliberately lowered his head, seemingly checking to see if she swallowed it. Finally, he stepped back, revealing Yuko's face on the hospital bed. Her lips, which had been tightly shut before, were now slightly parted. Shortly after, as he stepped forward again, Yuko opened her eyes. "Hey." "Haha." Yuko chuckled softly. At last, the mystery of her seemingly miraculous recovery had been solved. Chapter 322, Unpayable Debt. Yuko pressed the pause button. The image on the television froze at the moment she opened her eyes and met Chisato's gaze. The surveillance footage was crystal clear, making it obvious what had happened. Yuko's recovery was evidently a direct result of Chisato's actions. Normasa stared fixedly at the screen, his breathing growing unconsciously heavy. A doctor's heart is bound by compassion. The reason he had resolutely chosen this path in the first place was because, as a child, he had witnessed his own father suffer under the torment of illness, closing his eyes for the last time in endless pain. He didn't want such things to happen again. He wanted to acquire exceptional medical skills that could cure all diseases in the world. Judging by the current situation, he had indeed obtained exceptional medical skills. But even so, he couldn't bring hope to every patient. The deeper he delved into medical knowledge, the more he realized the limitations of modern medicine. There were still many diseases that, once contracted, became death sentences, ailments that humanity had no means of stopping. Yet what he had just witnessed shattered his understanding and planted a thought in his mind. If the formula of whatever that boy had in his possession could be made public, how many patients would benefit from it? Yuko's recovery was just one aspect. Most importantly, the damaged organs in her body had also healed almost instantly. Many terminal illnesses stem from the body being overwhelmed by viral attacks, pushing it beyond its limits and ultimately threatening life itself. If they had what he held in his hands, even if it couldn't cure diseases beyond leukemia, its immense regenerative effects could significantly extend the lives of terminal patients. Normasa-kun. Yuko narrowed her eyes slightly. Having been friends for many years, she knew his temperament and personality well. Seeing his expression shift from dazed contemplation to fiery fervor, she easily guessed what he was thinking. "You're thinking about going to Chisato and asking him directly for detailed information about what he fed me, aren't you?" Normasa snapped back to reality, but his fervor remained undiminished. "That's right. If what he gave you can be mass-produced, then every terminally ill patient in the world can be saved. If all goes well, the next major event he attends could be the Nobel Prize in Medicine ceremony. He would become the savior of the world." "All right, calm down. Think about it carefully. Why do you think he was so cautious, making sure everyone else was gone before feeding that thing to me? Doesn't that suggest it has some unique, irreplicable properties?" Yuko spoke with measured clarity. "If it were as simple as you say, why hasn't he already announced it to the public, registered a patent and trademark, and turned himself into a star of the medical world, basking in flowers and applause for the rest of his life?" Normasa froze, his soaring enthusiasm instantly doused with a bucket of cold water. That's right. Now that he thought about it rationally, that made perfect sense. Yuko got out of bed and walked over to him, placing a hand on her old friend's shoulder. "I know you want to do something for other patients, but some things can't be rushed. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. Leave this matter to me. I'll ask Chisato for the answers you seek. But whatever happens, don't let anyone else find out about this, alright?" Normasa let out a shallow sigh but nodded nonetheless. "You two still have things to talk about, don't you? I'll be going now. But Yuko, just to be safe, you should stay in the hospital a while longer and see how things go." "I understand." Normasa left the hospital room. Yuko let out a sigh of relief. It was good that he agreed. Normasa-kun was an upright person. He wasn't the type to say one thing to someone's face and do another behind their back. If he gave his word, there was no risk of him secretly going against it. Speaking of which, if he didn't possess such admirable qualities, she wouldn't have maintained their friendship for so many years. And she certainly wouldn't have placed her life in his hands when she was gravely ill. With one person settled, the next thing to deal with was. Yuko turned around, her gaze falling on Kazusa, who still sat beside the hospital bed, head bowed, deep in thought. Her daughter was what troubled her the most. Yuko sat down beside Kazusa and took her hand. "Kazusa, there are some things I can finally tell you now." Kazusa lifted her head to look at her mother. Yuko couldn't help but smile. She had to admit it had been a long time since she had seen her daughter show such an adorably dumbfounded expression from sheer shock. Should she say, as expected of her daughter, her life's greatest masterpiece? She almost wanted to scoop Kazusa into her arms, squeeze her cheeks, and listen to her let out soft, helpless little noises. "Don't worry, It's good news. Last night, Dr. Takanagi took another blood sample of mine to a different hospital for testing. The results matched the ones from this hospital, ruling out any possibility of faulty equipment. In other words, my body is completely healed. There's no need for surgery anymore. As long as I eat properly and on time, I'll be fine. Yuko opened her arms, expecting her daughter to burst into tears of joy and throw herself into her embrace. The two of them would share a warm and touching moment, showcasing a beautiful mother-daughter bond. But Kazusa didn't react as she had expected. Instead, she slowly shifted her gaze to the television screen, staring at the boy and her boyfriend. A complicated smile surfaced on her face. I see. You're cured. Yuko awkwardly lowered her hands. This was exactly what she had been worried about. Now that Kazusa knew Chisato had saved her life. Her simple-minded daughter, who was already infatuated with him, now had an even greater, unpayable debt of gratitude toward him. From now on, she would probably never have the upper hand in this relationship. But with herself keeping an eye on things, and considering Kazusa's own qualities though she might throw the occasional tantrum, there shouldn't be any major issues. Chapter 323, Caught Red-Handed. Mom. Why are you touching me all of a sudden? Kazusa, who was originally lost in thought staring at her boyfriend on the TV screen, but she didn't expect her mother to directly touch her body. Yuko continued her own behavior, accompanied by some ambiguous words. Look at my daughter's breasts, legs, perky little buttocks, slender waist and delicate features. There is no reason for there to be a problem. Yeah. That's right. Mom. Kazusa stood up in shame and got out of Yoko's reach, which made the other party stop. Alright, I'll stop teasing you. Let's get back to the main topic. What do you plan to do about Chisato, Kazusa? Kazusa slowly lowered her arms, which had been crossed over her chest. What do you mean, what am I going to do? I mean, how do you intend to face him from now on? And how do you plan to interact with him? Facing him and interacting with him, huh? There's no difference. I'll just treat him the same as before, and besides... Kazusa pressed her lips together, a look of overwhelming happiness appearing on her face. I want to properly thank him. Yuko teased with a playful smirk, for example, by using your body? Perhaps due to the emotional high from her mother's recovery, Kazusa, though still blushing, didn't react as impatiently as she normally would to such a blunt remark. Instead, she even had the presence of mind to retort, yeah. I'll make you a grandma by tonight. Yuko clicked her tongue and wagged her index finger, pointing out her daughter's mistake. Kazusa, you still haven't fully grasped your biology lessons. Normally, after intercourse, it takes about 7 to 15 days for a fertilized egg to develop into a new life. So even if you pounce on Chisato tonight and one of his little lucky swimmers makes it through all the obstacles, the earliest I could become a grandma would be next week. Kazusa's face turned crimson as she spun around to cover it with her hands. Had she gone insane? How could she end up discussing something like this with her mother? Had she completely forgotten how shameless she was? Yuko continued to muse aloud, but really, that kind of thing does feel amazing. I can't even remember the last time enough. That was the end of the jokes. Yuko suddenly turned serious. What I want to say is, Suzumiya Chisato is my benefactor, my lifesaver. I will never forget this step for as long as I live. I know that no amount of money could ever fully repay such kindness, but I will do everything I can to support him in any way possible from now on. Her tone shifted slightly. However, you are different. You can be grateful to Chisato for saving your mother's life, but you must never feel indebted to him because of it. I don't understand. It's fine if you don't. Just remember what I've told you. Yuko stood up and gently patted her daughter's head. At the same time, she secretly wished that Kazusa would never understand the deeper meaning behind her words. As the mother and daughter shared this rare moment of open-hearted peace, relieved that the crisis had passed, the hospital room door swung open. With a faint smile on his face, completely oblivious to what had transpired, Chisato strode in. Sorry, Yuko-san. The fruit shop didn't have grapes, so I bought some red seedless ones instead. The owner said they were really sweet, so they should be just here. It was as if something invisible had lodged itself in Chisato's throat, blocking the rest of his sentence. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of something utterly unbelievable. His neck stiffly turned, like a rusted mechanical gear grinding into motion. When his gaze fell on the television screen, he froze. The pudding and fruit in his hands slipped through his lifeless fingers and hit the floor. Wait. Why was there a surveillance camera in the hospital room? Wasn't this an invasion of privacy? Chisato was genuinely shocked. This was something he hadn't anticipated at all before taking action. And his reaction made Yuko raise an eyebrow in amusement. She had thought she'd need to put in some effort to get him to admit it, but with a reaction like this, there was no need to beat around the bush anymore. She could just lay it all out in the open. Before Yuko could speak, Kazusa had already rushed forward, throwing herself into Chizato's arms. The impact made him grunt involuntarily, snapping him back to reality. Crap. His secret mission to silence his future mother-in-law had been exposed. On reflex, Chizato's hands caught Kazusa as she threw herself at him, but his eyes were still locked onto Yuko. She, in contrast, wore a triumphant smirk, her expression practically dripping with mischief. Let's have a good talk about this, Chisato. Or rather, our heroic savior, who single-handedly changed the fate of this mother and daughter. I'm too old for this Chayunabiu nonsense. Stop calling me that in such a cringeworthy way. Silently, Chisato picked up the fallen pudding and fruit, placing them neatly on the table. But at this point, no one had the mind to eat. Ever since stepping into the hospital room and seeing the massive TV screen displaying undeniable evidence, Chisato knew there was no point in trying to struggle. He was already exposed, there was no use resisting. To calm himself, he had excused himself to the restroom before the mother and daughter could start questioning him. But the moment he stepped inside, before he could even close the door, Kazusa squeezed in after him. Her face was flushed red with shyness, and as soon as the door shut, she threw herself at him again. This time, instead of wrapping her arms around his waist like before, she hooked them around his neck. Gulp. Chisato's Adam's apple bobbed. Kazusa, don't talk. Kazusa pulled him down forcefully and pressed her lips against his with unwavering determination. Her technique was clumsy, but her emotions were raw and intense. Chisato was caught off guard, forced backward until his back hit the wall. Somewhere along the way, Kazusa's right hand had slipped under his shirt, her fingers tracing the bare skin beneath. What kind of man could withstand this? Chisato had no choice but to turn his head, breaking the kiss even though he had been thoroughly enjoying it. After all, Kazusa's mother was right outside. And he had no intention of making the restroom smell like squid. Holding Kazusa by the shoulders, he was just about to say something when tears began to spill from her eyes, rolling down her cheeks despite the bright smile on her face. Chisato. She murmured his name softly, unable to get out anything else. But her reaction alone spoke volumes. Chisato looked at her, then let out a sigh and smiled. Ah, whatever. If she knew, then she knew. After all, what he did wasn't a bad thing, right? Chapter 324, How Should I Repay You? After an absurdly long and intense kiss, Kazusa, nestled in his strong embrace, blushed as if she had been submerged in warm water. Waves of heat and comfort rippled around her, the lingering pleasure swirling in her senses. The rush of emotions, driven by hormones, sent countless ripples through her heart, keeping her mind heated as she replayed every detail of their intimate moment. Then, as passion temporarily receded, reason reclaimed control. Oh no. Kai must think I'm a shameless girl now. The thought made her hastily cover her lips with one hand, avoiding eye contact with her boyfriend as she quickly escaped the bathroom. Her abrupt closeness, followed by an equally sudden retreat, was honestly adorable to Chisato. Given his experience with his desk neighbor since they first met, he could pretty much guess what was running through her mind. He decided to let her be for now. The real problem was explaining all of this to Yuko. Kazusa might not care too much about details, but that sharp-witted woman definitely would. The fact that she had gone as far as pulling up hospital surveillance footage, playing it openly on the room's television without any attempt to hide it from him, sent a message that was as clear as day. I know everything. I have the evidence. So be good and confess, don't even think about trying to cover it up. Chisato leaned over the sink and turned on the faucet. One of these women overheated his brain, the other overheated his body. He needed some cold water to cool down. He didn't waste too much time in the bathroom. After all, this was inevitable. There was no point in running away, so he might as well deal with it sooner rather than later. After all, it wasn't like he had been caught doing something bad. On the contrary, he had done something good. He should carry himself with confidence. With that thought, the nervousness he had felt after seeing his own crime scene footage on the hospital TV slowly faded away. When he stepped out of the bathroom, only Yuko remained in the hospital room. She was leaning against the open window, her body slightly tilted forward, her hair fluttering in the breeze. Even in the simple blue and white hospital gown, she radiated an elegant and refined aura. Who would believe that a woman like this was the mother of a high school student? Hearing him step out, Yuko turned around. She knew exactly what was on his mind, so she casually tucked her hair behind her ear and explained, the hospital's parking lot is a bit far from the ward, and Moko brought a lot of things, so I sent Kazusa to help her. Chisato nodded in understanding and gestured toward the door. Should I go help too? No need, no need. The two of them can handle it. Yuko waved him off dismissively and then patted the seat beside her on the sofa. More importantly, I have a lot of questions for you right now. Figures. She probably sent Kazusa away so she could have a private conversation with him. Chisato glanced at the TV. It was turned off now. He nodded and sat down. Yuko didn't speak right away. Instead, she crossed one leg over the other, rested her right hand on her cheek, and turned slightly to scrutinize him with an intense gaze. A soft, impossibly gentle smile played on her lips. Under her stare, Chisato felt incredibly uneasy. He tried to meet her eyes, but the second their gazes locked, he panicked and immediately looked away. His reaction made Yuko's smile deepen, exuding an undeniable feminine charm. "No need to be so nervous, Chisato. You were a lot more composed when you visited my house last time. I still haven't forgotten how delicious the meal you cooked was. Yeah, well, last time, you were wearing proper clothes." The buttons on her hospital gown had much larger gaps, and with Yuko leaning forward like that. Not to be inappropriate, but he had definitely seen things he shouldn't have. Still, he didn't have a single impure thought, just pure embarrassment. Because this was Kazusa's mom. He wanted to respond to her teasing, but after hesitating for so long, he couldn't find the right words. He considered dropping a subtle hint, reaching for his own collar to demonstrate, but halfway through, he chickened out and awkwardly scratched his face instead. There was no way to do this. How was he supposed to bring it up? Right now, he was the only one feeling awkward. If he said something, they'd both be suffering. So Chisato decided to just go with it. He lowered his head and stared at the floor, sitting as obedient as a scolded child. "You're acting like you've done something to betray me, Chisato. Don't worry, I should be thanking you, not the other way around." To show her appreciation, Yuko reached out and playfully pinched his cheek. Chisato felt his embarrassment ease up slightly. And then he suddenly remembered how sensitive she was about her age and quickly corrected himself. "Yuko-san, I didn't actually do anything, no need to be so formal. Just call me mom like Kazusa does." Cough. Yuko's words were spoken so naturally, but they nearly made Chisato choke. Seeing his reaction, she frowned in thought. "I guess jumping straight to mom might be a little too much. How about something in between? You can call me mother-in-law. Is there any difference at all?" Chisato turned his head toward Yuko, his gaze still lowered as he stared at his own lap. "Yuko-san, the thing you wanted to talk to me about. This isn't the main point, is it?" Yuko chuckled. "Then I'll get straight to the point. In the surveillance footage, I saw that you deliberately sent Kazusa away before feeding me something. My miraculous recovery, it's directly related to whatever it was you gave me, isn't it?" Although she had already figured out most of the answer, she still wanted to confirm it for peace of mind. Chisato nodded honestly. He had already made up his mind not to deny it. "I knew it. The situation was urgent at the time, and that was the only way." Chisato kept his head lowered. "And I sincerely apologize for saying that you snore in your sleep. That doesn't really matter anymore. Can you tell me what exactly you fed me back then?" "Simply put, it was a type of medicine, one that can cure most malignant diseases." That kind of medicine, where did you get it?" This was the question Yuko was most curious about. But this time, Chisato didn't answer immediately. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Yuko-san, I can't tell you that." "I see." That was within her expectations. If he didn't mind others knowing, he would have just openly given her the medicine in the first place. "Then let me ask a different question. Is there any possibility of mass-producing this medicine?" She was asking this on behalf of her friend, Normasa Takanagi. Chisato answered seriously, "There is no possibility of mass production. So Yuko-san, now that you've recovered, please take care of your health. It would be best to get regular checkups at the hospital." Yuko nodded in understanding, but she still wasn't ready to give up. "Is it a technological limitation? Or a funding issue?" "Neither." Chisato shook his head. "Yuko-san, have you ever heard of Lonesome George? He was the last known Pinta Island tortoise. When he died, the species went extinct." Hearing his explanation, Yuko fell silent. "So, that medicine was one of a kind. Once it was used up, there would never be more." She let out a slow breath and sat up straight, unintentionally covering the view she had previously exposed. Now, Chisato could finally look at her without feeling uneasy. "Something so precious. You just used it on me like that?" "It wasn't just like that. You are Kazusa's mother. That alone was reason enough. And the outcome was absolutely worth it." Chisato stated his thoughts plainly. Using just a tiny pill to ensure Yuko-san's recovery and to bring back Kazusa's smile, that was a deal too good to pass up. There was no reason not to do it. Yuko gazed at him, her lips curving slightly in a subtle smile. "Kazusa, whether it's her social skills or her piano performance level, is still far behind me as her mother. But in one thing, she far surpasses me. If I had even half of her ability to choose a man, I wouldn't still be single now." Chisato had no idea how to respond to that. But Yuko didn't seem to expect a response. She continued, I understand the general situation now. Let's move on to the real business. Real business? Weren't we just talking about serious matters? Noticing his confusion, Yuko smiled. A hero who saved both my and Kazusa's lives, how could I not show any gratitude? Chisato quickly protested, Yuko-san, please don't. Alright, from now on, be a good boy and just listen to me. Yuko gently pressed her index finger against Chisato's lips. Over the years, I've traveled across the world competing, holding solo concerts, endorsing musical instruments, publishing piano textbooks in various languages, starting companies, investing in different industries. After working so hard for so long, I've made a modest fortune. So, let me briefly outline my liquid assets. In my personal account at the Japan Bank, I have around 170 million yen. My US account holds about $2 million, and my Swiss account has around 3 million Swiss francs. Because of my work, I also have accounts in other countries with smaller amounts, but those aren't worth mentioning. As for fixed assets, you already know about the house Kazusa and I settled in. My company, Yuko Co., Ltd., has 2 locations, its headquarters in Tokyo and a branch in Vienna. Besides that, I own 2 villas in Palm Beach, I hold shares in 2 opera houses in Vienna, and I also have an investment in a Bordeaux winery. Listening to all this, Chisato started to feel overwhelmed. He knew Yuko was wealthy, but he hadn't expected her to be this wealthy. Forget the liquid assets, just the 2 villas in Palm Beach alone were enough to make him flinch. Palm Beach? That's one of the most expensive real estate areas in the US, a top-tier vacation spot for the world's wealthiest elites. Yuko-san, you don't need to tell me all this. Chisato had to interrupt her. If he didn't, he feared he might lose his drive to work hard in life. You're Kazusa's boyfriend and my savior. We're going to be family sooner or later, so you'd have to know these things eventually. Kazusa grew up pampered and has no sense of money, but in this world, without money, you can't move an inch. When I retire, these assets will be managed by you anyway. Yuko spoke casually about her future plans, as if she wasn't joking in the slightest. Now, back to the main topic. Regarding my gratitude to the hero who saved me and my daughter, if I had to name my most precious possession, it would be Kazusa. But she already belongs to you, so I'll have to be more practical and reward you with something mundane but useful. She held up one finger. Here's what I'm thinking, I'll transfer 100 million yen to you for now. How does that sound? Huh? Chisato was genuinely shocked. Judging by Yuko's relaxed expression, it seemed like 100 million yen was no different from 100 yen to her. Please don't joke around. I can't, don't be so hasty. Hear me out first. Of course, my gratitude isn't worth just this little bit of money. I've already decided to spend my whole life repaying you. My plan is to give you 100 million yen now, and keep the rest for my work and other expenses. That way, my established career can continue generating money. Every year from now on, I'll give you 50% of my previous year's earnings, at least 50 million yen annually, as a minimum guarantee. As for the fixed assets I mentioned, once you and Kazusa get married, if you want them, I can transfer them to you as well. How about that? Chapter 325, Fortune or a Favor. At this point, it's necessary to provide some clarification. Although Yuko usually presents herself as approachable, appearing to be nothing more than a beautiful and graceful older sister-like figure, in reality, she is an undeniable piano prodigy. The honors she has received include, but are not limited to, winner of the 16th Chopin International Piano Competition Gold Medal, International Artist of the Year at the Classic Brit Awards, second place in the Tchaikovsky International Piano Competition, etc. When Suzumiya was previously brought to the underground music room by Kazusa, he was already deeply shocked by the sheer number of trophies, either hanging on the walls or placed on display shelves. However, in reality, the number of accolades her mother, Yuko, had received was several times greater than her daughter's. Moreover, the paths they took were different. At best, Kazusa was only somewhat well known within Japan, whereas Yuko was a recognized name in the world of classical music on a global scale. Given that she had worked so hard to reach such heights in her field, it was only natural for her to possess such wealth. If not for the fact that Yuko had been quite extravagant in her younger years, the total value of her current assets might have been even higher. However, Chisato was unaware of all this. His understanding of Yuko was only at the most superficial level, a woman with incredible piano skills, as well as a dignified and elegant demeanor, who also happened to be his girlfriend's mother. That was why, when she extended a single finger with a bright smile, straightforwardly offering him 100 million, Chisato's first reaction wasn't joy, but utter shock. Back in the restroom, he had already anticipated that she might express her gratitude to him. Perhaps her impression of him would improve, and she might even try to offer him some form of compensation. But outright giving him a 9-figure sum? That was way beyond his expectations. In fact, it even scared him a little. If you think it's not enough, Chisato, I can sell off some of my stocks and double the amount. That wouldn't be a problem either. Yuko tilted her head slightly and raised a second finger. Snapping out of his daze, Chisato quickly reached out to press down her two raised fingers. Please don't joke around, Miss Yuko. I'm not joking with you. And you don't have to feel like you're taking advantage of me. This is the reward you rightfully deserve. She paused, then deliberately curled her lips into a smirk, as if she had suddenly thought of something that mildly offended her. Or, are you saying that you think Yuko's life isn't even worth this much? Chisato shook his head immediately. Of course, Miss Yuko's life is worth far more than this amount. But I did what I did out of my own will, so I have no reason to demand compensation from you. Besides, even if I hadn't helped, maybe you would have been fine anyway. Medical technology is quite advanced nowadays. Perhaps you could have recovered smoothly after a bone marrow transplant. Don't try to mislead me by shifting the topic. I know my own condition best. Even if the surgery were miraculously successful, I wouldn't have many years left. Yes, bone marrow can be transplanted, but does modern medicine have the technology to replace all the organs in my body that have already started failing? If it weren't for you, I might have acted nonchalant on the surface, but deep down, I wouldn't have been able to suppress my grief. Someone who hasn't experienced the pain of a life-threatening illness wouldn't understand the suffering I've been enduring these past few days, both physically and mentally. The pessimism in my mind and the weakness of my body are secondary. What I worry about the most is Kazusa. If I die, she will definitely be devastated for a long time. She might never recover from it. Chisato's emotions were complicated. Miss Yuko, your thoughts are too pessimistic. I'm simply stating the truth. Indeed, Yuko saw things very clearly. For a moment, silence fell between the two. Still unwilling to accept my gratitude? Chisato nodded. Yuko raised an eyebrow in response. I see. So by refusing my gratitude, you're making me owe you a favor instead? That way, you can cash it in at the right time in the future. You're quite the clever one, aren't you? She had said this on purpose to lighten the mood, but at that moment, Chisato suddenly lifted his head and met her gaze. Yuko's casual smile froze. After years of navigating the social world, she had mastered the art of reading people. That was why, from the look on Chisato's face, she immediately caught onto some emotions that didn't quite match the situation. Her lips pressed together slightly. Ever since she confirmed that she had completely recovered, her elation at being given a second chance at life had been running high. But now, that feeling gradually cooled. She went over their conversation in her mind. The more she thought about it, the more it seemed to make sense. His refusal to accept her financial reward now had a plausible explanation. Because once she grasped the underlying reason, everything else naturally followed. Yuko took a deep breath. She looked at Chisato, who was still staring straight at her. In his eyes, she saw emotions like guilt and remorse. Her lips parted slightly, but the complex emotions swirling within her made her close them again. But if her suspicions were correct, then this needed to be addressed immediately and put to an end as soon as possible. Chisato, could it be that you actually have feelings for me? The moment those words left her mouth, she saw Chisato's eyes widen to the point of almost popping out, his expression looking as if he had just been struck by lightning. In that instant, Yuko immediately realized she had guessed wrong. But an experienced woman of the world like her was far beyond the league of naive school students still fumbling through life. With a trademark playful smile, she casually brushed off the awkwardness with a simple "I'm just joking." The atmosphere shifted back to normal, and deep inside, she let out a huge sigh of relief. It was a good thing this wasn't turning into one of those scenarios commonly seen in adult videos from a certain island nation. So then, what exactly is it? Yuko crossed her arms. If the problem wasn't related to her, then there was only one other possibility left. Well, it's a bit complicated. Chisato hesitated. His original plan had been to find the right time to come clean with Kazusa about certain things related to other girls in his life. But the day after he made up his mind, Kazusa hadn't came to school, and the matter was put on hold. Now, Yuko had already caught on to something. What he was struggling with now was whether to let Yuko know about it. Should he explain things privately to Kazusa first? Or should he take advantage of his good standing with his future mother-in-law and seek her help instead? It was difficult to predict how she would react. A life-saving favor was indeed priceless. But as a mother, upon learning that her daughter's boyfriend was fooling around with other girls, what kind of attitude would she have? He had no idea. As Chisato continued struggling over whether to confess or brush the matter aside, Yuko narrowed her eyes. Chisato, did you do something to betray Kazusa? Precise and straight to the point. Chapter 326, Guilty Confession. Chisato slumped on his chair. Since Yuko has already guessed this far, He felt there was no need to hide it anymore. He slowly nodded. For you to show such an expression, it proves that what you did was truly excessive. Hueco continued analyzing. Kazusa was just being affectionate with you in the restroom, which means that whatever you did to betray her, you are still keeping it from her for now. And based on these conditions, there can only be one conclusion. Being seen through so easily felt uncomfortable. Now that his unfaithful nature had been exposed, Chisato no longer had the confidence to meet her gaze. He answered in a low voice, just as you thought, Miss Hueco. Hueco sighed inwardly. As expected, what she had worried about had come to pass. That said, this situation was actually much easier to handle than what she had initially feared. After all, in her younger days, she too had experienced a time when she was ambiguously involved with several men at once. Wait, hold on, there's more than one, isn't there? Hueco sincerely hoped that the boy in front of her would shake his head and deny it, but the answer he gave even left her, someone who had once been quite the player, shocked. Yes. Besides Kazusa, there are 3 others. Hueco was speechless once again. A phrase came to her mind: some people are simply born strong. To be fair, Chisato was very handsome, the kind of boy whose looks fit the aesthetic preference of most women. He could be both obedient and rebellious, and with slight adjustments to his hairstyle and attire, he could easily pull off various styles. Naturally, many girls would be drawn to him, even older women might not be able to resist his charm. Hueco figured that her daughter falling for him must have had at least something to do with his looks. The boy sitting before her was not only the one who had just saved her life but also her daughter's current boyfriend. All things considered, she had to remain calm. So, including Kazusa, you are currently dating 4 girls at the same time? Yes. You're serious about Kazusa, aren't you? Otherwise, he wouldn't have used such a precious medicine to save her mother. Yes. So for the other 3, you only see them as casual flings, right? Once the time is right, you'll break up with them. Isn't that so? I'm sorry. Hueco let out a wry laugh in exasperation. Then what exactly is your plan? You're not seriously thinking that you can have them all, that they'll just accept each other and stay by your side forever, are you? Forget Kazusa, do you really think the others would agree to that? Brat, this is modern society. Not ancient times. Hueco was already getting a bit angry. If she had known about Chisato's true nature when they first met, she wouldn't have given him a warm welcome at all. Chisato cautiously spoke up, actually, one of them has already accepted the idea. The other 2 will be more difficult, but I will try to find a way. Hueco stared at him with sharp eyes. You've got some nerve. Did you forget that I'm Kazusa's mother? What exactly do you expect me to do? Help you convince my daughter to let you have a harem? I never had such an idea. I just thought. This was something you should know sooner or later. And now that I know, what then? I don't have any concrete plans yet. But I will find the right time to come clean to Kazusa. And then you'll be mercilessly dumped. I guarantee it. That girl is nothing like me. She won't sit here and calmly talk to you after hearing this. She'll feel utterly betrayed and leave you without hesitation. Even if that happens, I will persist in earning her forgiveness. I just hope that if things really come to that, Miss Hueco, you won't stop me from seeing her. That is my only request. Looking at the earnest expression on Chisato's face, Hueco felt increasingly conflicted. By all accounts, his actions were undeniably those of a scumbag. But the way he spoke at this moment made it hard to truly hate him. Is it really that good-looking people are more easily forgiven for their actions? If Chisato hadn't been involved with her daughter, if he had only been some handsome young man who had saved her life, she would have had no problem supporting him in any way. Forget 4 girls, she wouldn't even care if it were 40. But this involved her daughter, the most precious person in her life. That changed everything. I won't need to do anything. She'll leave you on her own. When that happens, I will fully support whatever decision she makes as her mother. That was something Hueco could say with absolute certainty because she knew her daughter well. Kazusa viewed love in the purest way possible. There was no way she would ever accept Chisato's situation. That's enough. Thank you. Also, I'll have Moko transfer 100 million yen to your account. That really isn't this one thing has nothing to do with the other. Your favor to me and your situation with Kazusa are 2 separate matters. My decision won't change. Since the amount is large, it will be transferred in installments over time. Hueco sighed. She felt she could already foresee the inevitable collapse of Chisato and her daughter's relationship. And if you ever run into any difficulties in the future, feel free to come to me. Maybe I can help. Understood. Ah, you really are something. There was nothing more to say. Everything that needed to be discussed had been settled. Hueco and Chisato exchanged contact information. When he repeatedly refused to give her his bank account details, she simply leaned forward and physically snatched his wallet from his pocket. Given that he had just recovered from a severe illness and that she was Kazusa's mother, Chisato didn't dare to resist too much. He could only watch as she took out his bank card. As expected of a top pianist, her ability to memorize details was astounding. With just a glance at the card, she had already committed the numbers to memory before tossing it back to him. 2 minutes later, Kazusa and Muko entered the hospital room. Following Yuko's instructions, they brought a large amount of takeout food, desserts, and cakes. After being stuck in the hospital eating nothing but bland patient meals, she had almost forgotten the taste of real food. As Yuko exaggeratedly explained how her condition had been misdiagnosed and that she would recover soon, Muko's expression gradually turned to joy, and the hospital room was filled with the lively atmosphere of a celebration. The fewer people who knew about Chisato saving her, the better. Otherwise, it would only invite endless trouble. By the time the clock struck 5 in the evening, the sun was beginning to set. Now that Yuko's health had stabilized and she only needed to stay in the hospital for observation, Chisato had no reason to linger any longer. After saying his goodbyes, he left the hospital room. Kazusa, her face glowing with happiness, silently followed him like a little tail, intending to walk him to the hospital entrance. Watching them leave, Yuko turned to Muko, who was peeling an apple. "Muko, what do you think of Chisato?" Without looking up, Muko smiled and replied, "He's great. Handsome, mature, and reliable. I heard from Kazusa that he's also an outstanding student. He even ranked first in the recent exams. Honestly, I hope my future child can be as exceptional as he is." "But why are you asking all of a sudden, President?" "It's nothing. I just wanted to hear your opinion. By the way, Muko should have had experience in that aspect, right?" "What aspect?" "That is, between men and women." "How rude, President. How old do you think I am this year?" "That would be great. Then tell me, if a man is dating 4 women at the same time, can he satisfy everyone every day?" "It's unlikely no matter how you think about it, right?" The long apple peel that Muko peeled broke. "President, you haven't found a boyfriend again, have you? Is he from this hospital? Is he Dr. Takanagi? But he has a family. What kind of woman do you see me as?" "Never mind. I can't explain it to you. Just pretend I never asked." Chapter 327, Telling the Truth. "Call me when you get home. Have a proper meal first when you arrive, then rest afterward. I'll be back at school after staying with my mom for a few more days, so even if you don't see me for a while, don't feel lonely. Just bear with it for now." After stepping out of the hospital room, Kazusa took the initiative to hold her boyfriend's hand, chatting cheerfully about various things. During that time, Chisato remained silent, simply listening while carefully feeling the warmth of her soft palm. They walked to the end of the hospital corridor, turned left at the L-shaped corner, and went downstairs to the hospital lobby. It was quiet here. Other than the nurse standing behind the glass at the service desk, there was no one else around. Outside the main entrance, taxis were parked along the roadside. Chisato had already prepared himself mentally. Meeting Kazusa's puzzled gaze, he held her hand and led her to a seat by the wall in the lobby. After taking a deep breath, Chisato spoke. "Kazusa, I have something to tell you." Kazusa looked at her boyfriend's sudden change in expression, confused but still nodding lightly. She reached out to adjust the collar of his shirt, which had been slightly disheveled, carefully straightening it. Chisato could smell her enticing fragrance and feel the ticklish sensation of her warm fingertips brushing against the skin of his neck. "I've been hiding something really terrible from you all this time. I'm sorry." He reached out and held Kazusa's wrist, stopping her from continuing her thoughtful gestures. If this went on any longer, he feared he would lose the courage to confess and simply accept things as they were. Kazusa froze for a moment at his sudden change in demeanor, her previous joy and excitement suppressed. "What is it?" "Besides you, I've actually been seeing other girls as well." Saying it out loud was much easier than he had expected. But what was painful was the inevitable fallout that would follow. Chisato could feel Kazusa's hand trembling slightly. "Hey. You're joking, right?" Kazusa forced a smile, trying to dismiss it as a bad joke. Chisato steeled himself and continued. "I'm not joking. While I've been dating you, I've also been involved with other girls." Seeing the seriousness in Chisato's expression, something inside Kazusa cracked. "Why?" That was the only thought that surfaced in her mind. "Weren't we happy together? Then why? Why would you do this?" "Mom's illness has gotten better. I've been studying hard, just like you wanted. We were making wonderful memories together, happy and carefree. We were supposed to continue like this, one day watching the summer fireworks together, going to the beach again next year. Being with you that future was already more than enough for me. So why did you do this? I don't understand. I really don't understand." Biting her lip, Kazusa was still overwhelmed by shock and hesitation. Her mind was in chaos, her breathing becoming unsteady. Seeing her reaction, Chisato felt an unbearable tightness in his chest. He never wanted to make Kazusa show such an expression, and yet... "I'm sorry." That was all he could say now. Her response was a pair of reddening eyes and a raised right hand that never came down. Her shoulders trembled, her expression contorted, and tears began to fall. "I see. I wish you happiness." She stood up and ran back up the stairs without looking back. Chisato watched her leave, feeling hollow. If possible, he wished Kazusa had slapped him just now. There was no point in chasing after her now. Even if he did, they wouldn't be able to have a meaningful conversation at this moment. It might be selfish, but at the very least, Miss Yuko, who already knew everything, could be there for the heartbroken Kazusa in his place. He should head back. Chisato mechanically stepped out of the hospital and got into a taxi, numbly giving the driver his destination. Halfway through the ride, his phone rang. He had no desire to talk to anyone at the moment and was about to decline the call outright, but the moment he saw the caller ID, he let out a shallow sigh and chose to answer. Ariri. By the time he took a taxi from the hospital to his apartment, an hour had passed. After getting out of the car, Chisato followed Ariri's instructions, stopping by the supermarket to buy some seasoning and drinks before heading home. The house was anything but quiet. The moment he opened the door, dark wings fluttered over from the living room, landing on his shoulder. Chisato forced a smile and gently patted the bird's head. The owners of the neatly arranged pairs of shoes at the entrance appeared before him almost simultaneously. "You're back." Utaha, as usual, was wearing black tights as she took the shopping bags from his hands. "You can rest in the living room for a bit, or take a bath first. Dinner will take a little while." Wearing an apron, Ariri helped him take off his uniform jacket, hanging it neatly on a coat rack. This natural and heartwarming scene soothed Chisato somewhat. Taking off his shoes, he walked forward, meeting Utaha's slightly envious gaze, and pulled Ariri into a hug, burying his face in her hair. "Chisato, stop it. I still have to finish cooking." Ariri gently pushed him away, glancing toward Utaha. Understanding her signal, Utaha wrapped her arm around his wrist and led him to the living room. Sitting on the sofa, she kept her legs together and patted her lap. "Want to lie down for a bit?" "Thanks." Chisato didn't stand on ceremony. Feeling particularly heavy today due to his low spirits, he slowly lay down, resting his head on Utaha's exceptionally soft lap. "I've heard most of the details from Ariri. It's really great that Kazusa's mother's illness was just a misdiagnosis. And then there's..." Her slender fingers brushed across Chisato's face, and she let out a chuckle. "Not bad. I didn't expect you to come back unscathed after voluntarily confessing everything. I thought you'd at least have a handprint on your face." Looking up at Utaha's delicate features, Chisato couldn't resist reaching out and pinching her cheek. "You. Don't gloat." Utaha chuckled softly, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Then, she reached out with both hands and began gently massaging Chisato's forehead. She could tell he wasn't in a good mood, so even though she was joking, she kept it light. "So, can you tell me? How did Kazusa react after you honestly told her about our existence?" "There's not much to say. She looked utterly disappointed in me and walked away. In the end, this really is all my fault. Your situation is quite unique. Most girls wouldn't be able to accept it. Her reaction is actually quite normal, so you don't have to feel too troubled by it." Hearing her say that, Chisato, who had just closed his eyes, slowly opened them again. He hesitated. "Utaha." Kasumijoka blinked her large eyes. "What? This doesn't sound like something you would say. There's nothing strange about it. People grow, don't they? I did hold quite a bit of hostility toward Kazusa before. But thinking about it now, my feelings don't necessarily influence your decisions, so I quickly let go of it." "What? You don't believe me?" Utaha smiled gently. "In just a few short days, my perspective has changed. Originally, I planned for Ariri and me to show up on the day of your school festival without any prior notice, scare you a little, and at the same time, formally declare our presence to Kazusa, essentially, a declaration of war. But after thinking it through, I realized that such a childish plan was wrong from the very beginning. I had overlooked something. In this world, no one could possibly have stronger feelings for you than Ariri and I. Because of this feeling, I subconsciously assumed that any other girl around you must also share the same emotions. But the truth is, that was a mistake. When you confessed everything to us, compare how we reacted to how she did. The difference is obvious." As Utaha spoke, she freed up her right hand and gently pinched his earlobe before brushing over his lips. She continued in a calm tone. "You've already confessed everything to Kazusa. Your turn is over. Now, it's up to her to respond. If she truly can't accept your honesty, then that just proves that her feelings for you were only so deep, Once you realize that, there's no need to dwell on it. You'll have a clear answer, won't you? The moment she finished speaking, she met Chizato's gaze and slowly lowered her head, pressing her lips against his. A sweet taste spread through him. He thought, maybe Utaha had just eaten candied plums or honeydew melon for it to be this sweet. When Utaha lifted her head again, her eyes were filled with an overwhelming gentleness. All in all, what I want to tell you is that from now on, no matter what you decide to do, Ayuri and I will support you. If you ever feel exhausted from work or studies, just remember we'll be waiting for you at home. Chisato stared into her eyes and remained silent for a long time. Utaha. There's nothing you need to say. Just lie here and rest for a bit. I'll go run a bath for you, okay? Yeah. Chisato sank into the warm water of the bathtub. You probably didn't get much rest at the hospital last night, did you? Don't think about anything, just relax and take it easy for now. Thank you, Utaha. Idiot. With a soft smile, Utaha took one last glance at his completely exposed body. Feeling her heart pounding, she quickly closed the bathroom door. After turning around, she let out a small sigh of relief and headed toward the kitchen. Inside the kitchen, Ayuri was tasting soup from a shallow dish. Just as Utaha was about to say something, Ayuri subtly glanced toward the living room. Close the kitchen door. The oil fumes are drifting out. You're not even frying anything. Don't exaggerate. Despite her complaint, Utaha still did as she was told. Once the door was closed, Ayuri seemed more at ease. She asked proactively, so? Did you do as I told you? Utaha pursed her lips in dissatisfaction. Crossing her arms, she replied, though it wasn't obvious, I could tell you deliberately made me say things that badmouthed Kazusa and tried to drive a wedge between them. Ayuri nodded without hesitation. That's right. That was exactly my goal. Chisato is already feeling down because of Kazusa, so this is the perfect time to emphasize our presence and make him feel reassured and happy. That way, he'll naturally become more attached to us. If we're lucky, he might even end up breaking things off with her completely. Taking advantage of the situation, huh? Just so we're clear, no matter what happens next, I'm not playing the bad guy again. That won't do. There's something else important I need you to handle. What? We can't waste this opportunity. Find some time to meet with Kazusa in private. And what exactly do you want me to do? Nothing special. Just reveal your identity and show off that usual arrogant attitude of yours. Get under her skin. You want me to provoke her further so she completely loses her patience with Chisato? Ayuri nodded. Utaha scoffed. Not a bad idea. Right? Right? You make it sound easy. Why don't you do it yourself? If Chisato finds out, do you think he'll be happy with me? As much as I hate to admit it, I don't have the confidence to stand in front of Kazusa and overpower her presence. You've seen it yourself, her, assets. Ayuri gestured toward her chest and sighed in frustration. I just can't compete with that. Hey. Utaha let out a mocking laugh but unconsciously straightened her back slightly, revealing a hint of pride. Indeed, when it came to physique, she was more than confident. She wasn't just above her peers, she could even rival some adults. And based on what she had seen in her dreams, her body would continue to develop even further in the future. So, it has to be you. I know this isn't the most honorable thing, but if you agree, I'll owe you a favor. And I'll even tell you something tonight, something that will make Chisato's affection for you skyrocket. Seeing Ayuri's slightly flushed cheeks, Utaha immediately understood. She wanted to scold her for being shameless, but recalling Chisato's well-built physique as he entered the bath, she coughed lightly and silently accepted. Chapter 328, Mother will support you no matter what. Hospital room. After returning, Kazusa sat on the sofa with a somber expression, not saying a word. Even when Miko greeted her, she received no response. Noticing the faint redness around Kazusa's eyes, Yuko let out a soft sigh. She understood what had happened. She realized she had underestimated Chisato. Putting aside everything else, just his decisiveness and straightforwardness in handling things were enough to show his boldness. Was he truly that confident? Did he genuinely believe that even after learning the truth, Kazusa wouldn't leave his side? Miko, it's getting late. My condition is nothing serious, so you should head home and get some rest. No need to visit me again. In a few days, if my health checks out, I'll be discharged directly. Oh, right, take this. Yuko took a sticky note from the bedside drawer and wrote down Chisato's bank account number. Leaning in, she instructed Miko to transfer 100 million yen to that account. Miko looked surprised and confused, but recalling Yuko's usual free-spirited way of handling things, she didn't ask any questions and simply agreed to take care of it. 5 minutes later, after gathering her belongings, Miko left the hospital room, leaving space for the mother and daughter to be alone. Yuko sat on the other end of the sofa, a relaxed smile on her face. You look terrible. Let me guess, did Chisato just tell you something? Kazusa lifted her head and looked at her mother. Realizing something, she responded in a muffled voice, tinged with a hint of nasal congestion. You knew about this all along, didn't you? More or less. Yuko's light-hearted tone, as if this were none of her concern, irritated Kazusa. She instantly stood up, her voice slightly losing control. What kind of mother does this? You knew and still didn't tell your own daughter? Yuko patiently explained, I didn't know much earlier than you. Just this afternoon, in fact. If he hadn't confessed on his own, I'd still be in the dark. Kazusa lowered her head, her frustration and anger deflating in an instant. She collapsed back onto the sofa in defeat. That bastard. So, now that you know the truth, what are you planning to do? Are you going to break up with him? Or have you already broken up? The girl remained silent, shaking her head slightly in distress. She felt lost. Even now, she was struggling to accept reality, let alone decide what to do next. This isn't the time to be aimless. Face your feelings head-on. Identify what you want the most and act on it. Don't leave yourself with regrets. As she spoke, Yuko seemed to recall something from her past. Her expression turned melancholic for a brief moment, but since Kazusa had her head lowered, she didn't notice. I don't know. I really don't know. You're just like me in some ways, but in others, you're completely different. Yuko sighed helplessly. If you really don't know what to do, and if dragging this out is only making you more miserable, then letting go is also an option. Look at me, I've lived freely even without a man, haven't I? If you keep refusing to talk, even your mother won't be able to help you, you know. Mom. Alright. No crying now, you're a high schooler already. Yuko gently embraced her daughter, patting her shoulder with a hint of affection. Let's not dwell on this for now. If you really don't know what to do, then don't think about it for a while. Time will give you the answer. Time was the fairest judge. It treated all things equally and was the best medicine for a wounded heart. Yuko thought Kazusa's situation was hardly unique in today's society. But because the one experiencing it was her daughter, it left her with a deep, lingering sense of helplessness. Once you've made your decision, no matter what it is, your mother will support you. Kazusa felt her eyes grow damp as she whimpered softly, burying her face deeper into her mother's embrace. That night after coming out of the bathroom, Chisato stared at his phone for a long time. In the end, he decided to send Kazusa a message, just a simple greeting. But even after a long while, it remained unread. That was to be expected. Given how Kazusa felt right now, she probably couldn't even be bothered to look at messages from him. There was no point in rushing. He should give her some time. Hearing Arari call for him, Chisato placed his phone on the bedside table and stepped out of his room. He wasn't particularly hungry, but he didn't want to let his negative emotions affect Arari and Utaha. So, he forced himself to eat something. After dinner, they all leaned close to each other on the living room sofa, enjoying the rare peaceful moments together. Later that night, the three of them returned to their respective rooms. Lying in bed, Chisato left the small night light on. Staring blankly at the white ceiling, he didn't know how long he had been lost in thought until he heard a gentle knock on the door. The door is not locked. With his response, the door slowly creaked open, and Arari cautiously peeked her head inside. I had a feeling that you wouldn't be able to fall asleep easily tonight, Chisato. Looks like I was right. She smiled gently, as if pleased with her own accurate prediction. Chisato didn't think too much about it. Instead, he was momentarily captivated by how cute she looked, peeking her little head through the doorway. He instinctively patted the space beside him on the bed. Arari stepped fully into the room, closed the door behind her, and crawled over to his side on her hands and knees, settling herself against the pillow he had prepared for her. Chisato leaned down, burying his face against her chest. She was wearing a silk camisole night dress, its texture soft and smooth against his skin. Combined with her sweet fragrance, the sensation alone was enough to make him forget his troubles at least for a little while. He felt as though he could just drown in this warmth, using it to escape from everything he didn't want to face. Arari gently stroked his hair and spoke candidly. If you're feeling upset, Chisato, you can talk to me about it. Chisato shook his head as he rested against her. Pouring his heart out about his relationship troubles with another girl to someone who liked him? That was way too thoughtless, even for him. This is enough. Just let me hold you for a little while. He nuzzled closer and slowly closed his eyes. Hey, what's this? You're acting like a little kid. Arari looked down at Chisato resting in her arms. Her fingers, which had been running through his hair, now moved to gently trace his face. Her movements softened even more. Chapter 329, Tag Team Battle. Sorry, Arari murmured. Even though you look really sad right now, I can't help but feel a little happy. that things aren't going well between you and Kazusa. Chisato let out a bitter smile, realizing what she was trying to do. If you wanted to distract me, there were probably better ways to do it. You saw right through me, huh? But if this helps you recover, even a little bit, then I guess it worked. Her tone remained casual, but just as Chisato was about to relax, he felt something strange. Something soft and nimble touched his stomach, Hariri's toes. He lifted his head and glanced at her in confusion. She lightly bit her lip, her expression shifting into something almost sultry. As she met his surprised gaze, her eyes shimmered, brimming with emotion, as if they might overflow at any moment. Then, without hesitation, she swung her leg over and straddled him, her slender fingers trailing over his neck, applying the faintest pressure against his skin. A dry sensation built up in Chisato's throat. He understood exactly where this was heading, and a strong resistance rose within him. He had just come clean to Kazusa earlier that day. And now, the moment he returned home, he was in bed with Ariri. The thought made his chest tighten with unease. Ariri. I'm really not in the mood for this right now. He sounded like a husband in his late 40s, struggling to keep up with his wife's increasing demands, desperately searching for an escape. But unlike usual, Ariri didn't back down. The obedient girl she normally was tonight, she was acting entirely on her own will. I don't care, she whispered. I don't want you to stay trapped in this sadness all by yourself. I want to cheer you up. I want to make you happy. Her voice grew softer, but her intent only became clearer. Ariri, listen to me. I'm really not upset, so you don't have to. Chisato was flustered, struggling to find the right words. But before he could finish, a sound from the door made him turn his head. Utaha stepped inside. She was wearing a camisole night dress similar to Ariri's, her pale shoulders and legs exposed under the dim light. Her face was flushed, and as she approached the bed, Ariri shifted aside, making room for her. Utaha settled in next to Chisato, her delicate hand pressing lightly against his chest. This is bad. Seeing the complete lack of surprise in both Ariri and Utaha's expressions, Chisato instantly realized they had planned this together. He wanted to protest, but before he could, Ariri silenced him with a gentle kiss. Their determination was overwhelming. Whatever resistance he had, it was already being devoured, crumbling away piece by piece. At some point, the bedside lamp flicked off. Their movements grew bolder, their intentions undeniable. Chisato clenched his fists. But in the end, his resolve was completely shattered. His body, ignoring the depths of his disheartened emotions, indulged in the moment. Under the same night sky, at the hospital, Kazusa held her pillow tightly, her heart aching as if it had been split in two. Her silent tears soaked the fabric, and no matter how much she willed herself to sleep, it wouldn't come. Meanwhile, across town, the ones who had conspired to bring their plan to fruition, Ariri and Utaha, glistened with sweat, their breathless voices carrying an unmistakable mix of excitement and pleasure. The next morning, as Chisato opened his eyes and woke up, he found himself staring at the two girls still sound asleep beside him, lost in thought. The long-held fantasy buried deep within his heart, the one he had longed for day and night, had finally become reality last night, and in the simplest, most straightforward way possible. In the end, he still couldn't restrain himself. Not only did he surrender completely to their desires, but even after his surrender, they didn't let him off so easily. The final result was that Chisato had no choice but to rise up and fight back. After all, how could he be satisfied with being on the receiving end the whole time? It couldn't be helped whether it was Utaha or Ariri, either of them curling up in his arms and acting spoiled would have been enough to break his composure. Not to mention, last night, the two of them had joined forces. There was simply no way he could resist. No matter how many times he reminded himself that Kazusa was still hurting and that he shouldn't be doing something like this, he ultimately couldn't stop his body's instincts from crossing the line of reason. He didn't even want to indulge, but it was just too tempting. There was no way to resist. With a complicated expression, Chisato carefully got out of bed. After placing a gentle kiss on each of their foreheads, he gathered their scattered clothes from the floor and placed them neatly at the foot of the bed before heading to the bathroom to wash up. The moment he left the room, however, the two girls who had seemed to be fast asleep opened their eyes almost simultaneously. They locked eyes at close range, instinctively shrinking their heads beneath the blanket, pulling it tightly around themselves. During the heat of the moment last night, they hadn't cared much, but now that the passion had faded and the male lead was no longer present, they couldn't help but feel a little awkward. To break the silence, Ariri took the initiative to speak. "You're awake too, huh?" Utaha lowered her gaze slightly and murmured a quiet, "How are you feeling? Can you not ask such embarrassing questions?" Judging from how Chisato acted last night, he really liked having the two of us together. So from now on, this kind of situation will probably happen more and more. You'd better start getting used to it. You really are. What? Utaha hesitated for a moment but ultimately chose to say it. A lot more shameless than I expected. Ariri fell silent for a moment. Let's call it being uninhibited. Utaha clicked her tongue in amazement. I never would have guessed. The elegant, refined young lady admired by so many at school, actually capable of reaching such extreme levels of shame. Getting her golden-haired head tilted back while meowing like a cat. Seriously, I'd love to see that again. Ariri scoffed and fired back. Let me make it clear once again, I did all that for the sole purpose of helping Chisato forget about Kazusa and cheer him up. Otherwise, why do you think I went out of my way to match his every move? Unlike someone else, who, after getting her fill of pleasure, just lay there emotionless, savoring the afterglow. Honestly, between the two of us, you were the one completely defeated by your own desires. Utaha gritted her teeth. That was my first time. Oh? And yet the sounds you made loud enough to penetrate through the walls to the next house over sure didn't sound like someone experiencing their first time. You, this woman. Despite being completely in sync just last night, the moment they woke up and saw each other, they had immediately gone back to attacking one another like always. However, at a certain point, they tacitly agreed to stop bickering and return to more serious matters. Does your body still hurt? Hearing Ariri's question, Utaha, still wrapped tightly in the thin blanket, cautiously tried to spread her legs slightly. It's manageable. I can still walk normally. She furrowed her brows. While there was some pain, it was within her tolerable range. On this point, she had to give Ariri some credit if not for her drawing Chisato's attention midway through and redirecting the intensity of his assault elsewhere. Utaha doubted she would have had such a near-perfect first experience. Had she been subjected to the full force of that relentless attack, there was no doubt she would have lost consciousness. She might have even ended up in the same state Ariri had been in before, requiring several days to fully recover. Good. Do you remember what I mentioned before? You want me to find an opportunity to meet with Kazusa in private, right? Yeah. Especially since we can't afford to lose in terms of presence. Ariri placed her hands on Utaha's shoulders, looking her in the eye. So between the two of us, you're the only one who can go face her. Chapter 330, Going to School Again. Knock, knock, knock. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Sizzle. The sound of a knife striking the cutting board, the gentle bubbling of porridge simmering over low heat, and the instant sizzle of fish hitting hot oil. Listening to these familiar kitchen sounds, Kazusa felt as if she hadn't experienced this scene in a long time. In her memory, the last time her mother had personally put on an apron and cooked a meal was back when she was in elementary school. No, perhaps even earlier than that. After all, she had already forgotten what her mother's cooking tasted like. It had been a week since that day. During her hospitalization for observation, Yuko's health remained stable, completely normal, even. Some of the minor ailments she used to suffer from, like neck and back pain caused by years of overwork, had also disappeared. In short, all medical reports indicated that Yuko had made a full recovery. There was no longer any need to worry. She was officially discharged. Throughout the past week, Chisato had been trying to contact Kazusa, starting with text messages and later calling her directly. But every attempt ended in failure. Kazusa either ignored his calls or simply hung up. She didn't know how to face Chisato after hearing the truth from him. She didn't know what to say if she answered. There was now an invisible barrier between them. They were no longer as close as they had been, able to talk about anything without reservation. The moment Kazusa realized she had been deceived, betrayed, their relationship had ceased to be as pure as before. Eventually, Yuko, unable to bear watching her daughter constantly staring at her phone with a look of sadness and frustration, decided to intervene. She also worried that if Kazusa kept ignoring his calls, Chisato might get too anxious and come all the way to the hospital again. So, at one point, Yuko took the initiative to call Chisato herself. She spoke with him while deliberately putting the call on speaker, making sure her daughter could hear everything. With her acting as a mediator, at least there was still a channel for them to stay somewhat connected. And so, things remained uneventful until Yuko's discharge. On Tuesday afternoon, mother and daughter completed the discharge procedures and returned home. Now, it was Wednesday morning. Yuko had woken up early and was busy in the kitchen. Kazusa, drawn in by this rare sight, sat at the kitchen bar, resting her chin on her hand with a dazed expression. Once breakfast was ready, the two of them sat at the table to eat together. It's been a long time since I last cooked. How does it taste? Yuko asked. Kazusa slowly chewed a piece of fish. All I can say is, this is exactly what I'd expect from someone who hasn't cooked in a long time. Yuko chuckled. At least all the advice and encouragement she had been offering these past few days hadn't gone to waste. On the surface, Kazusa seemed to have recovered well. She was joking again and no longer looked like a pitiful, Abandoned puppy in need of sympathy. Just make do with it. If it's really that bad, add some ketchup or something. Either way, my cooking can't compare to Chizato's. At that name, Kazusa's hand froze mid-meal. She set her chopsticks down. You had to bring him up? Great, now my good mood this morning is ruined. You say that, but who was the one eagerly eavesdropping, holding their breath, every time I talked to him on the phone, afraid to miss a single word? Kazusa looked away. You were the one who put it on speaker. It's not like I had a choice. Well, let's just say that's true. Kazusa, I called your teacher. I told them you'll be back at school starting today. After breakfast, grab your bag and head straight there. I'm not going. Kazusa's response was immediate and firm. Going to school now would mean facing him. And right now, without having sorted out her own thoughts, she had no desire to have any kind of interaction with him. Yuko sighed in mild frustration. Kazusa. I know I said that sometimes, when you don't know how to deal with something, time will give you an answer. But if you keep running away and waiting too long, you might miss something important. If that happens, are you sure you won't regret it? Kazusa kept her head down, focusing on her meal without responding. Yuko set down her chopsticks, crossing her hands under her chin. If you've truly decided that you never want to see Chisato again, then go to school today, meet him one last time, and tell him everything clearly. Tell him that you can't understand, nor can you forgive his deception and betrayal. That from this day forward, it's over between you two completely and utterly, with not even the slightest possibility of reconciliation. And once you've said that, you should also thank him for the care he has shown you during this time. Once you've put an end to everything, if you feel that staying at this school would only make things awkward, I'll handle your withdrawal procedures. After that, if you have plans of your own, go ahead and pursue them. If not, then come with me, we'll move to Vienna and settle down there. Hearing those words, Kazusa looked up in surprise. She studied her mother's expression, trying to catch any sign of hesitation. But unfortunately, Yuko's eyes were like a still lake, calm, unwavering, devoid of any jest or warmth. She was serious. Kazusa was certain of it. Then suddenly, Yuko's demeanor shifted. She smiled, her tone softening. But if you find that no matter what, you just can't let go of him, then stop suppressing your feelings. Give it your all. Beat out the other competitors who are in your way, and make your love unfold the way you want it to. I believe in my daughter. If you put your mind to it, there's no reason you'd lose to anyone else. Mom. So, have you decided? Will you go to school today? Watching the subtle change in Kazusa's expression, Yuko felt a sense of relief. It hadn't been easy. Since Kazusa started high school, opportunities for Yuko to truly fulfill her role as a mother had been rare. Just like cooking, this was something that felt long overdue. Kazusa nodded, her mindset shifting. She turned her head to glance at the clock on the living room wall. Following her gaze, Yuko understood what her daughter was thinking and chuckled. There's still plenty of time. You'll make it even if you finish breakfast. No need, I'm full. Take your time and eat, Mom. With that, Kazusa stood up and hurried upstairs. Hearing her footsteps thudding against the wooden staircase, Yuko thought to herself that she should start keeping an eye on Kazusa's sugar intake. If she gained weight, losing it wouldn't be an easy task. Kazusa changed into her school uniform and slung her bag over her shoulder. As she bent down at the entrance to switch shoes, Yuko crouched beside her, gently smoothing out a few stray hairs. When you get to school, what do you plan to say to Chisato? I don't know. But I think that once I see him, I'll figure it out. Kazusa finished putting on her shoes and walked straight out the door without looking back. Be careful on your way. Leaning against the doorframe, Yuko watched her daughter leave. Got it. At the very least, this should be enough for now. Chapter 331, I'm his girlfriend. Yuko's original intention wasn't to help Kazusa to confirm her true feelings using a deliberately extreme statement. But over the past few days, every time Kazusa heard Chisato's voice over the phone, the way her expression wavered between relief and pain made it impossible for Yuko to ignore. A mother and daughter share a bond. She wanted her daughter to find happiness. That was the real reason she made this decision. And in a way, it also meant giving Chisato another chance. However, knowing the kind of person she was, there was no way Yuko would settle for merely offering verbal support. After watching Kazusa leave, she returned to the dining room and finished the breakfast she had made, one that at least looked decent. I should call Andohara over to make dinner tonight, muttering to herself. She tidied up the table and dishes. Finally, she was able to relax on the couch. Then, picking up her phone, she dialed a certain acquaintance with a rather special profession. Goru-kun, it's been a while. How have you been? Thanks to you, I'm doing pretty well. I feel like I could live to be 100. Haha, Calling me an old witch is just too much. After some brief pleasantries, Hueco got to the main point. Actually, there's something I need your help with. Yeah, there's someone I'd like you to look into. Of course, the more details, the better. His personal relationships, daily habits, things like that. Okay, I knew I could count on you. I'll be waiting for your update. Inside a street-side cafe, Utaha sat by the window, her gaze fixed outside. At this time in the morning, there weren't many customers in the shop. It was already the third day, and so far, she still hadn't seen the person she had been hoping to see. Ever since Iriri officially asked her for this favor, she had been thinking about how to meet Kazusa. Her original plan was to secretly borrow Chizato's phone, find Kazusa's number in his contacts, and call her directly to introduce herself and arrange a meeting. But on second thought, secretly meeting Kazusa was already something she was keeping from Chizato, and if she also went behind his back to check his phone, it just felt too wrong. Not to mention, if she called so abruptly, she had no idea how Kazusa would react. There was also the risk that Chizato might find out what she was up to. So she abandoned that idea and resorted to this admittedly inconvenient but necessary approach instead. From what she had gathered from Chizato, Kazusa's mother was hospitalized, but it wasn't anything serious. She was expected to be discharged in a few days. That meant Kazusa herself would likely still be at the hospital for a few more days. Taking that into account, Utaha hadn't taken any action last week, waiting until Monday of this week to came to this cafe. She and Iriri had followed Chizato and Kazusa before and knew where Kazusa lived. And this cafe was right on the route between Kazusa's house and the train station. If she was going to school, she would have to pass by here. Sitting by the window, Utaha had a clear view of the pedestrians on the street. As much as she didn't want to admit it, Kazusa's striking looks and tall figure made her stand out in a crowd. There was no way Utaha would miss her if she walked by. And when that moment came, she could follow her plan, step out, call out to Kazusa, start a conversation, and, just as Iriri had suggested, establish dominance and make her back off. But after waiting here for 3 days, she still hadn't caught sight of Kazusa. For the past few days, she had stayed until after 8 in the morning, which meant she was only making it to class after the first period ended. Didn't Chizato say her mother's condition wasn't serious? If it wasn't serious, why was she still in the hospital? Utaha sipped her coffee, growing increasingly frustrated with the situation. Thinking about it now, maybe it was too late to complain. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Iriri had just used her as a pawn, praising her figure, complimenting her presence, saying that she was the only one who could keep Kazusa in check and that Iriri herself wasn't a match for her. The more she thought about what Iriri had said, the more suspicious it seemed. Even though she had said she owed Utaha a favor, who knew when she would actually repay it? Yep, she definitely got played. She was the one doing the probing while Iriri sat back and waited to share the intel afterward, without any of the stress or risk. That girl, was she getting smarter lately? TCH. The more she thought about how she had been used, the more annoyed she became. But given Utaha's personality, since she had already agreed to this, there was no reason to quit halfway. It was 7:30 now. As usual, she would wait another half hour. If Kazusa still didn't show up, then maybe she really was still at the hospital. Or maybe because of Chizato she didn't want to go to school. If it was the latter, then she might have no choice but to visit her directly. But doing that would mean running into her mother, which would make things even more complicated. Utaha's train of thought suddenly halted. She put down her coffee, her eyes widening slightly as she took a quiet breath. The person she had been waiting for these past few days had finally appeared in her line of sight. Seeing Kazusa's figure, Utaha felt a bit nervous. But over the past few days, she had mentally rehearsed this conversation countless times. She had prepared herself thoroughly, so there was nothing to worry about. She stood up and walked out of the cafe with steady steps. By the time she reached the door, Kazusa had already passed in front of the cafe. Utaha had to quicken her pace, jogging a few steps to catch up. "Excuse me, sorry to bother you." Hearing someone call out, Kazusa instinctively turned her head. Her gaze met that of the girl standing not far behind her. Narrowing her sharp, keen eyes slightly, she asked in confusion, "Are you talking to me?" Utaha brushed her hair back, smiling as she nodded. "Yes, Kazusa. I was hoping to take a little of your time. I have something I'd like to discuss with you." Kazusa stared at her, as if she was trying to recall something. But since the other girl hadn't stated her reason directly, she wasn't sure yet. "You. Do we know each other? My apologies for not introducing myself sooner." Utaha politely bent slightly at the waist. "My name is Kasumijoka Utaha. I'm Suzumiya Chizato's girlfriend." Chapter 332, we know the cafe employee, holding a cloth, was wiping down the tables. He appeared to be diligently working, but in reality, His attention was entirely focused on the two girls sitting across from each other by the window. He recognized the girl wearing a white headband and black tights. She had been coming here for several days in a row at the same time. Each day, she would simply order a cup of coffee, sit there absent-mindedly staring out the window, and then leave around 8 o'clock. Judging by her school uniform and the bag she carried, it was clear she was a high school student. However, her repetitive behavior over the past few days was puzzling. And today, that mystery was finally solved. Sitting across from this elegant and composed girl was another girl, one who exuded an icy coldness, someone who, at a glance, didn't seem easy to deal with. The reason the employee had this impression was that the new girl had been giving off an unmistakable aura of hostility and aggression ever since she sat down. Indeed, Kazusa was in a terrible mood right now, and it showed in her sharper-than-usual gaze. She had been struggling with her feelings over Chisato for so long. Today, after her mother's encouragement, she had finally mustered the resolve to go to school and have a proper, face-to-face conversation with him. She had already decided what she wanted to ask him while walking here. She would ask him how far things had progressed between him and this so-called other girlfriend. Depending on his answer, she would decide what to say next. She would ask him if he was willing to cut ties with that woman and if he was willing to start over with her, questions along those lines. Yes, after hearing what her mother had said, the thought of breaking up with Chisato, moving to Vienna with her mother, and possibly never seeing him again, never having any contact with him for the rest of her life, made Kazusa feel as if something was squeezing her heart, suffocating her. She couldn't lie to herself. Even after learning that he had deceived and betrayed her, she still couldn't let go of him completely. He wasn't just the prince who had pulled her out of her lonely, cramped shell and shown her the warmth and comfort of the world. He was also the person who had saved her mother's life. These two factors intertwined, making it impossible for her to forget him. Kazusa, who had always longed for and admired romance, even found excuses for Chisato's lies and deception. Perhaps he had only acted that way because he had been seduced by a wicked woman. It was fine, everyone makes mistakes. As long as he could promise never to make the same mistake again, she wouldn't mind forgiving him. And just as she had reached this point in her thoughts while walking, someone called out to her. When she turned around, she saw a girl about her age, one so breathtakingly beautiful that even as a fellow girl, she couldn't help but be impressed. Then, in a calm and soft voice, the girl introduced herself as Chisato's girlfriend. Kazusa froze for a moment. She had already forgotten what she was feeling when she nodded in response to the girl's invitation, agreeing to come to this cafe and sit down here with her. The situation was both incredibly awkward and incredibly unpleasant, leaving Kazusa momentarily speechless, unsure of what to say. However, neither Utaha, who had approached her with a clear purpose, nor Kazusa, who was determined to reclaim her boyfriend from the so-called wicked woman, could just sit there in silence, staring at each other. Thus, after the waiter served their coffee, Kazusa was the first to break the silence. "What do you want with me?" It was a natural way to start the conversation. The girl had already introduced herself when she approached Kazusa outside, so naturally, Kazusa wanted to know her purpose. Utaha answered truthfully. "I want to talk to you about Chisato." Hearing her boyfriend's name from the mouth of the girl sitting across from her, Kazusa felt an immediate wave of disgust. She tried to suppress her expression, but since she had never been good at hiding her emotions, her face inevitably darkened. Seeing this reaction, Utaha smirked slightly. It had been a while since she felt this sense of control, the feeling that she was the one steering the conversation, not the other way around. From afar, Kazusa might have seemed like an imposing and difficult person to approach. But up close, Utaha realized that while Kazusa wasn't easy to talk to, her expressions were incredibly easy to read. With the difficulty lowered to this extent, there was no doubt in Utaha's mind that she would achieve her intended advantage today. "Did he ask you to come find me?" After a moment of silent consideration, Kazusa asked another question. Utaha shook her head. "No, he doesn't know. I came to find you for my own reasons, Misan." On this point, Utaha had no intention of playing tricks. She chose to tell the truth. Although lying could mislead Kazusa and further worsen her perception of Chisato, Utaha believed she didn't need such underhanded tactics to achieve her desired outcome. Besides, if she told such a lie and Chisato found out afterward, he would undoubtedly resent her. That was something she absolutely wouldn't allow to happen. She couldn't let Kazusa be the only one asking questions. Now that she had stated her purpose, it was time for her to take control of the conversation's direction. She wasn't sure how much Chisato had confessed to Kazusa, so there was no need to rush. She would probe her step by step. "I've known about you for quite some time, Misan. Through certain means, I also found out that this road is part of your daily route to school. I've been waiting here for you since Monday. This is the third day." Utaha spoke leisurely, then picked up her coffee and took a small sip. You said you've known about me for a long time. What do you mean by that? Kazusa's gaze became unsteady. She had been trying to suppress her emotions, but at this moment, she was beginning to lose control. Ah, so Chisato hadn't told her about this yet either. Seeing her reaction, Utaha formed a new idea in her mind. It's exactly as I said before you knew about us. She pointed at herself and then at Kazusa. We already knew about you. Chapter 333, Neither of us will leave him. Utaha had a clear sense of what should and shouldn't be said. Statements like this, which were based on facts, were harmless to reveal. Even if she didn't say it now, Chisato would tell Kazusa sooner or later. However, what Utaha didn't expect was that as soon as she said this, Kazusa's pupils dilated. And with a sudden slap on the table, she stood up abruptly, shattering the previously calm atmosphere between them. Hey, what do you mean by we? A terrifying possibility flashed through Kazusa's mind, filling her with fear. Her voice trembled slightly as she asked the question. Chisato hadn't even clarified something as important as this. Utaha was a little surprised, but even so, the situation was still within her ability to handle. It was just that the way she had originally planned to phrase things might need some adjustment now. Sorry, I didn't realize Chisato hadn't made this clear to you yet. Utaha's composed demeanor only made Kazusa even more furious. Even so, she forced herself to stay calm and listen to the rest of what she had to say. The truth is, besides you and me, there's another. No, actually, there are two other girls who share a same relationship with him. She paused briefly, then decided to count Hitori in as well. Kazusa's lips trembled as she sought confirmation. When you say relationship, you mean? Utaha gave her a sharp, precise smile, as if wielding a diamond-edged blade, and delivered the cold, hard truth. Of course, I mean he's dating them. Kazusa's vision blurred for a moment. She sat back down, her expression blank, her eyes dull and lifeless. She had never imagined that when her boyfriend had confessed to her about his other relationship, the so-called other person was actually not just one person. Aside from herself there were three others. Utaha had originally planned to press the attack and reveal that she and Ariri were already living with Chisato, along with how far their relationship had progressed. But looking at Kazusa's expression, she ultimately couldn't bring herself to go that far. At the same time, an unexpected sense of déjà vu arose within her. At this moment, she felt just like those throwaway villainous female characters in romance novels, the ones who obstruct the main couple's happiness, only to meet a miserable end in the end. I'm sorry. I really didn't know you were unaware of all this. Maybe it would have been better if Chisato had been the one to tell you instead. Utaha slowed down her offensive. Part of it was because she couldn't bear to see Kazusa's current expression, and the other part was that she wanted to come across as relatively reasonable in this conversation so that Chisato wouldn't resent her later. Don't say such meaningless things. What difference does it make if he's the one telling me this? Kazusa clenched her fists tightly, struggling to suppress her emotions. You came here today just for this? To flaunt your superiority from above and mock me for being a clueless fool? Utaha shook her head. You've misunderstood. I simply wanted to meet you. Until now, I've only known of your existence through what Chisato has told me, but I never had the chance to truly understand you. Kazusa's face was filled with undisguised sarcasm. Understand me? Do you really think that's necessary? Utaha nodded seriously. The reason I came to see you was to figure out what you really think. If you truly can't accept Chisato, then don't drag this out, just break up with him cleanly. That would be best for everyone. Kazusa let out a cold laugh. You want me to do that, so everything goes exactly how you want, is that it? Utaha shook her head again. You can think whatever you want. But whatever decision you make has nothing to do with me. No matter what you choose to do, my decision won't change. I will stay by his side. That is an absolute certainty. You. Are you kidding me? Kazusa's voice was filled with rage, but her expression was visibly fragile. Her eyes are welling up. Looking like that won't scare anyone. In the end, she's still just a girl. As their conversation progressed, Utaha started to feel increasingly like she was being unfair. The two of them weren't even on the same emotional level. This wasn't a confrontation between equals. If anything, this felt more like an adult bullying a child. Seriously, she hadn't intended to make her cry. I'm not joking. I would like to see you and Chisato end things, yes. But ultimately, you'll follow your own heart when making that decision. My purpose in coming here today was to tell you this. There's another girl whose stance I'm unsure of, but as for me and Ariri, the other girl by Chisato's side, neither of us will ever leave him. And I have confidence Chisato will never abandon us. Utaha emphasized this again, her tone resolute. So if you're thinking that you can make him give us up and stay only by your side, I advise you to abandon that idea. If you really can't accept this situation, then as I said from the beginning, it would be better for you to let go sooner rather than later. That would be best for both you and Chisato." Having said everything she needed to say, Utaha no longer had any interest in continuing the conversation. She wasn't the type to gloat after gaining the upper hand. Without waiting for Kazusa's response, she pulled a sticky note from her bag, wrote down a contact number in her elegant handwriting, and pushed it forward. Then, she stood up and gave a slight bow. "Well then, I'll be taking my leave." Utaha left the cafe. After walking some distance, she turned back and saw that Kazusa was still sitting there, in the exact same position as when she had left, showing no intention of moving. Putting herself in Kazusa's shoes, Utaha could somewhat understand how awful she must be feeling right now. But no matter what Iriri said later, she was never playing the villain in a situation like this again. Chapter 334, A Stalker? Bang. Thump, 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 thump. Yuko, who had picked up yoga again after a long time and was reacquainting herself with the movements she had learned before, suddenly heard the loud slam of the front door from the entryway. Immediately after, hurried footsteps rushed upstairs. Getting up from her yoga mat, she walked to her daughter's room on the second floor. The door was locked from the inside. What's going on? She had finally managed to talk her into going out, but now she's already back? Knock, knock. She knocked on the door just in case. "Kazusa, what's wrong? Did you forget something?" After a moment, a response came from inside. "No, I don't feel well. I'm staying home to rest." As a professional pianist, having exceptional technique was a given, but beyond that, Yuko also had an incredibly sharp sense of hearing. She could clearly pick up the nasal tone in her daughter's voice, the one she was desperately trying to hide but couldn't fully suppress. "Geez, crying again?" Yuko shook her head helplessly outside the door, feeling both exasperated and amused. If only her daughter had inherited even half of her carefree personality, she wouldn't be agonizing over something like this. Back when she was in high school, she had her fair share of emotional entanglements with various boys, but piano had always been her top priority. Never once had she lost control over her emotions like this. To her, the situation was a simple choice: either tolerate it or fight for it. Locking herself in her room and crying like Kazusa was doing was the most pointless thing she could imagine. But at the same time, Yuko understood that the reason she could be so nonchalant about it was because of her own rich experiences in love and the fact that she was merely a bystander. She wasn't the one personally involved, so she couldn't fully grasp the depth of heartbreak. She had no idea how strong the emotional bond between them was. Still, seeing her beloved daughter in such a state, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. She had originally planned to let Kazusa and Chisato resolve this on their own, only stepping in to provide support when necessary. For instance, if Kazusa wanted to fight for her love, she had considered slipping a few small square packages into her wallet before the date as a subtle form of encouragement. But judging from the current situation, for some unknown reason, her daughter had completely collapsed, unable to stand back up, let alone move forward. Interfering in a younger generation's love life was something Yuko had always found somewhat disgraceful. But now, she had no choice. "I see. Then rest well. I'll call your teacher and let them know. Do you want anything for lunch?" "No, just let me sleep for a while." "Got it. Rest well." Yuko didn't say anything more. She returned to the living room, sat back down on her yoga mat, and resumed the routine she had paused earlier while deep in thought. She hadn't practiced in years. Normally, her body should have stiffened from sitting for so long, but strangely enough, she felt even more flexible than before. Movements that she had struggled with in the past, like a full split, were now effortless. How odd. Could this change in her body be related to the medicine Chisato had given her? Ugh, of all people, my daughter's boyfriend had to be the one who saved my life. This is such a headache. Guess I'll put that aside for now. I had told Miko that I'd be back to work next week, but it looks like I'll have to extend my break a little longer. I just can't leave Kazusa alone in this state. At school. Chisato glanced at the empty seat beside him. Ever since that day, Kazusa had been completely absent from his sight for nearly a week. In this modern age of communication, he hadn't been able to contact her at all during this time. His messages disappeared into the void, and his calls went unanswered. If not for the occasional updates from Yuko every 2 or 3 days, he wouldn't have been able to remain this calm. But according to Yuko-san, Kazusa had at least started eating properly again in the past few days. That meant if he waited just a little longer, she might finally stop avoiding him, and they could have the conversation they needed to have. Yet today was no different from the days before. Lunchtime arrived, and still, Kazusa did not appear. At this rate, she likely wouldn't come at all today. Just like usual, Chisato headed toward the music room. And as always, Hattori was by his side. After lunch, She would sit in a chair and practice her guitar skills for the upcoming Shibuya concert. She also made sure to set aside some time for Chisato to rest his head on her lap while she gave him a head massage. She had noticed that he seemed troubled lately. Considering that Kazusa hadn't been to school for days, it wasn't hard to guess that Chisato's gloominess was somewhat related to her. However, even though she was aware of it, since Chisato didn't seem inclined to talk about it, she refrained from asking too many questions. Simply staying by his side and sharing a small part of his worries in whatever way she could was enough to make her feel content. Midway through, Chisato's phone chimed with a notification. If it's not a message from Ishiki, then it's probably that again. He lazily picked up his phone to check. As expected, it was a notification from the bank, another deposit of several million yen into his account. Yuko hadn't been joking when she mentioned repaying his kindness back at the hospital. Over the past few days, he had been receiving similar transfers continuously. Roughly estimating, the total had already surpassed 70 million yen. In a few more days, it would likely stop. By then, he would officially be a billionaire. If he managed his finances well, he could afford to live a laid-back life without worries. But that wasn't what Chisato wanted. More than money, he wished for Kazusa's forgiveness. And if he could push his luck a little further, he wanted her to stay by his side. 2 more days he would give Kazusa until this Saturday. If she still chose to avoid him, then he wouldn't just sit idly and wait anymore. No matter what response she gave him, it didn't matter. This slow, drawn-out agony was simply unbearable. After school, Chisato's routine remained the same as usual. Although Kazusa's avoidance had put him in a low mood, he still had to move forward along his usual path. Leaving the school gate with Hitori, he didn't rush to Starsea right away. Instead, he accompanied her to a record store to buy the albums she liked. After that, the two of them tried out a well-reviewed yakiniku restaurant. By the time they finished dinner, it was 6 o'clock, just the right time to report in at the shop. Incidentally, despite the fact that Hitori had previously told the members of the Keshoku band that she was a third party in someone else's relationship, their attitude toward Chisato hadn't changed much. Aside from a bit of awkwardness the first time they met again, things quickly returned to normal. Ikuyo still greeted him with her usual bright smile. Najuka often invited him to listen to their ensemble and asked for his feedback. Ryo, as always, rummaged through his bag from time to time in search of snacks and casually reached out to borrow money. Their friendship mattered to them, and they didn't want the truth they had learned from Hitori to affect their relationship. So, for now, there was nothing to worry about regarding the Keshoku band. Besides Kazusa, the only other people worth noting were Iroha and Utaha. Iroha had no idea what Chisato had been going through lately. Since he hadn't paid much attention to her these past few days, she had started overthinking things, which only led her to message him more frequently. However, all she received in return were short, perfunctory replies, which frustrated her even more. In this state of mind, she furiously decided to invite Hayama Hayato out, using the excuse that she needed his recommendations for supplementary study materials as her upperclassman. Since they were in the same club and interacted often, Hayama naturally didn't refuse. After picking out the textbooks, they went to a dessert shop, where she deliberately acted cute and asked Hayato to take a few intimate selfies with her. Of course, intimate was a bit of an exaggeration, it was just the two of them facing the camera and making peace signs. But after some editing, adding pink heart decorations to the photos, she hesitated for a long time before finally sending them to Chisato, feeling a mix of nervousness, anticipation, and anxiety. Several hours later, all she received in response was a single word: congratulations. That response made Iroha inexplicably furious. As for Utaha, perhaps because she had already crossed that line completely, she had mentally let go of all reservations. Every couple of nights, she would slip into his bed, despite Chisato's repeated resistance, telling her he wasn't in the mood. But rather than being discouraged, she seemed to find it even more exciting. Then, without waiting for his consent, she would take the lead, her rising enthusiasm gradually pulling Chisato, who had initially insisted he wasn't in the mood, into the same fervent state as her. It continued until she had to bite her lip hard or bury her face into a pillow to stifle the sounds escaping her. There was no helping it. Dreams might feel real, but no matter how vivid, they couldn't compare to reality. After experiencing it for herself, Utaha found it impossible to keep such thoughts out of her mind for long. It wasn't the best analogy, but in some ways, it was like an addiction. Once you had a taste, if too much time passed without indulging again, an inexplicable irritation would creep in. No matter what you did, it wouldn't go away until you satisfied the craving once more. What's wrong, Chisato-kun? On the train, Hitori cautiously asked after noticing Chisato staring out the window with a sigh. She wanted to help ease his worries. If something is troubling you, Chisato-kun, maybe I can help. Let Hitori help. Chisato let his thoughts drift, picturing her stammering awkwardly in front of Kazusa, pleading for her to forgive him. Yeah, that would probably be asking too much. Don't worry, I can handle it myself. Chisato smiled and patted her head. He wasn't just putting on a brave front ever since he decided on the path of I want it all, he had anticipated that things would reach this point sooner or later. This wasn't something anyone else could help him with. He had to face it and resolve it on his own. After getting off the train, the two exited the station through their usual route, just like always. But a few sharp caws from crows caught Chisato's attention. He turned his head and met the gaze of a black-winged figure perched on a distant power pole. Following its line of sight, he saw 3 crows standing on the wall of a tall building. 2 were close together, hopping forward at an even pace. The third followed at a slight distance, moving closer and farther intermittently. A rather abstract message, but after spending so much time with this particular crow, their mutual understanding had long since reached perfection. Chisato instantly got the hint. He turned to Hitori and said, "Let's take a little detour today." Hitori nodded without hesitation, assuming he wanted to buy something. Midway through, they veered off the main road into a small alley. The man who had been following them from a short distance hesitated for a moment before slowly trailing after them. Peeking around the corner, he saw the pink-haired girl standing at the alley's exit, speaking to someone obscured by the wall. He waited patiently, planning to follow once they started moving again. During the idle moment, he lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, and exhaled in satisfaction. Just then, someone tapped him lightly on the shoulder from behind. Chapter 335, Kamiyaguru was stunned. Kamiyaguru, 43 years old, graduated from the Japan Central Police Academy and is now the head of a detective agency. With his background as a former detective and his 10th degree black belt in judo, he is like a fish in water in his current profession. Over the years, his detective agency has grown in scale and earned a solid reputation in the industry. His career was thriving. Then one day, he suddenly received a call from an old friend he hadn't spoken to in a long time. His acquaintance with his friend, Mayuko, stemmed from a banquet hosted by a wealthy patron. That night, he had been deeply captivated by Yuko, who was performing in an evening gown. It was love at first sight. Being single at the time, he subtly inquired about her and learned that she was also unattached, so he boldly made his move. In the end, he got politely turned down, but since they both shared a love for drinking, they became good friends. Though they didn't meet often, they maintained a good relationship over the years, exchanging New Year's cards and gifts. Yuko had never asked him for a favor before. On the contrary, she had even helped him secure autographs from renowned musicians and singers for his music-loving wife, something he had never forgotten. So when she finally did ask for his help, requesting an investigation into a young boy, Kamiyaguru didn't delegate the task to another detective at his agency. Instead, he personally took it on. This showed just how seriously he took her request. Besides, how hard could it be to investigate an ordinary boy? In Kamiyaguru's career, this was barely a drizzle compared to the storms he had weathered. After all, he had once helped the police take down a drug cartel and had identified a serial killer in a sea of people when no one else could. He was certain that this request from his old friend would be handled swiftly and efficiently. Feeling confident, he set out on his investigation only for things to take an unexpected turn. From this morning, he had been tailing his target in secret. His methods for gathering intelligence were executed flawlessly, with a level of professionalism that left no room for criticism. But no matter how skilled he was, there were always blind spots beyond the scope of his knowledge. Starting around noon, a certain black-winged observer had already noticed his suspicious behavior. Since Chisato was busy at school and couldn't play with it, the bird had been aimlessly circling the area. It spotted Kamiyaguru and, out of sheer curiosity, spent the entire afternoon observing him. A sudden tap on his shoulder sent a shiver down Kamiyaguru's spine. Cigarette still in his mouth, he turned around only to come face to face with a grinning young man. It was a face he knew all too well, the one he had been following just moments ago. Wait. This kid was ahead of me just now. When the hell did he circle around? Behind his sunglasses, his eyes widened slightly, but as a seasoned detective, his reaction time was impeccable. What do you want? He deliberately put on a sour expression, trying to look unapproachable and attempt to play it off as though he were just a regular passerby who happened to be in the area. If the kid was merely suspicious but not certain, admitting anything outright would be foolish. Chisato tilted his head slightly, then calmly reached out and plucked the cigarette from Kamiyaguru's mouth. Before Kamiyaguru could react to the sudden gesture, Chisato reached out again and took off his sunglasses. You little before he could finish cursing, Chisato interrupted him, studying his face intently. You're Kamiyaguru, the famous detective, aren't you? I'm not. The immediate denial didn't shake Chisato in the slightest. He remained firm. You totally are. I saw a report on TV about you assisting the police in capturing criminals. That distinctive, stylish mustache of yours is pretty unforgettable. Ha. Ha. Stylish, huh? That's a fair compliment. Kamiyaguru awkwardly scratched the back of his head, laughing dryly only for Chisato to deliver the killing blow. So, who hired a famous detective like you to investigate me? Kamiyaguru stumbled back a step, cold sweat forming on his forehead. He suddenly realized that his earlier judgment had been dead wrong. He had been far too careless. The residence. Dinner had been prepared by Obara-san, and the table was filled with mouth-watering dishes, an undeniable step above Yuko's own cooking. Some things were best left to the professionals. As she inhaled the delicious aroma, Yuko silently acknowledged this fact. She then made her way upstairs, stopping in front of her daughter's room. Knocking on the door, she reached for the latch, only to find unsurprisingly that it was locked from the inside. Seriously? How much longer is she going to sulk? No matter what had happened, she wouldn't say a word about it. You're not going to talk to me, Kazusa? Kazusa? Yuko's knocking on the door became heavier, accompanied by increasingly loud calls. I understand that you're in a bad mood right now, but no matter how upset you are, you still need to eat. Have you forgotten my past mistake? If you don't eat properly, your immune system will weaken, and you'll be at risk of all kinds of illnesses. Do you want to end up like I did, lying in a hospital bed in unbearable pain? Having said this much, Kazusa could no longer pretend she hadn't heard. Without a word, she opened the door. The room was dim, with the curtains drawn shut. Dressed in cotton pajamas, her hair disheveled, Kazusa's eyes were slightly swollen. Who knew how long she had been silently crying? That brat, Chisato, is truly unforgivable. Seeing her daughter like this, Yuko couldn't help but feel a pang of heartache. She pulled Kazusa into an embrace and patted her head. Be good, go wash your face first. And Ohara and I will wait for you to have dinner together. Kazusa nodded silently and headed for the washroom. Yuko went downstairs to the living room to wait. And Ohara, seeing her come down, took the initiative to excuse herself, politely declining Yuko's invitation to stay for dinner, saying that she had to prepare dinner at home. After she left, Yuko stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the silent night sky and letting out a gentle sigh. At that moment, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed Kamiyaguru. She smiled, thinking that he must have made quick progress on her request. However, upon answering, what she got was an embarrassed apology from Kamiyaguru. Sorry, Yuko, things didn't go very smoothly. Feeling utterly humiliated, he explained in full detail how he had been caught red-handed by his target. By the time he finished, his old face was flushed red with embarrassment. To be tripped up by some kid, this was nothing short of a disgrace to his career. Yuko found it hard to believe. She was well aware of Kamiyaguru's abilities. He was a legitimate police academy graduate and had served in the criminal investigation unit. His investigative and tailing skills were top-notch. It was precisely because she trusted his capabilities that she had asked him to investigate Chisato. And yet, someone as skilled as he was had actually been outmaneuvered by that boy. After her initial surprise, a playful smile appeared on Yuko's lips. This was getting more and more interesting. She asked softly, Guru-kun, do you know how he discovered you? I have no idea. I've been racking my brain over it. Logically speaking, it shouldn't have happened. I was extremely cautious the whole time, keeping a considerable distance. There's no reason he should have noticed me. Kamiyaguru's tone was filled with helplessness. If one listened closely, there was even a hint of grievance in it. Ever since he got back to the agency, he had been pulling at his already sparse hair, trying to figure out where he had slipped up. The frustration was unbearable. Yuko held back a chuckle and continued, then, Guru-kun, did you tell him that I was the one who hired you to tail him? Of course not. Protecting a client's privacy is a fundamental rule in our line of work. That kid was trying to dig out who hired me, but I didn't tell him a single word. I just turned around and left. Kamiyaguru hesitated for a moment. Though he wasn't entirely confident, he still reassured her, Yuko, don't worry. Even though I got caught, I'll still complete what I promised you. My agency has other skilled detectives. I'll assign them to the case and do my best to get you the information you want. It'll just take a bit longer this time. To avoid alerting him again, we have to be more cautious moving forward. Yuko smiled faintly. No need. I originally wanted to gather information quietly, but since I've been exposed, it doesn't matter anymore. I can ask him directly next time. Though, of course, there was no guarantee that he'd give her a straight answer. Kamiyaguru grew anxious. Yuko, don't be so hasty. Even if I said it'd take longer, at most, it won't go beyond 2 weeks. I still have friends at the police station. I can pull some strings and get his file. No need. That boy is actually very sharp. Since he caught you today, he's probably already making some guesses. He might have even locked onto me as the one behind it. If he hasn't called to ask me about it yet, he's probably just waiting for me to come clean first. Kamigaru fell silent at that, feeling utterly defeated. Sorry, this was my mistake. Guru-kun, don't say that. This wasn't your fault at all. Let's go out for a drink sometime. After a few more casual remarks, Yuko ended the call. To even catch Guru-kun. That boy. Kazusa, having finished washing her face, walked into the living room just in time to hear her mother murmuring to herself. She asked, puzzled, "What?" "Nothing." Yuko immediately put on a smile, placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders, and guided her to the dining table. And Oharu had something to do at home, so she left early. "Let's eat. I just bought your favorite mousse cake. After dinner, we can have some dessert once we've digested a little. With this kind of diet, I'm definitely going to gain weight." Chapter 336, Let's Talk It Out. Starry Performance Hall. Behind the bar counter, polishing a wine glass with a white cloth, Chisato watched as the members of Keshoku Band finished their live performance on stage. At the same time, his mind wandered back to what had happened that afternoon. That well-known detective had been caught red-handed by him but still refused to admit anything. Instead of giving away any useful information, he quickly fled. But the mere fact that Chisato had detected his tailing was already enough for him to draw some conclusions. When Darkwings alerted him to a potential stalker, his first thought was that someone might be following not him, but Hitori. After all, incidents like this were common in Japan. Many actresses and celebrities had obsessive fans who wouldn't leave them alone. Keshoku Band's popularity had been skyrocketing lately, and with a growing fan base, all sorts of people were bound to appear. However, upon getting closer and realizing that the person tailing them was a rather well-known detective who had even appeared on the news, Chisato's perspective shifted instantly. Given everything that had happened to him recently, he had already narrowed down a prime suspect. Mayuko. Most likely, she had hired a detective to investigate him for her daughter's sake, and perhaps also to learn more about the person who had once saved her life. Thinking it over, she was the only one who had both the motive and the means to do this. That said, even if Chisato had figured it out, there wasn't much he could do. The detective had kept his mouth shut and escaped. There was no way he could confront Yuko about it based on mere speculation. Besides, after everything he had confessed to Kazusa, he didn't really have the right to accuse someone else of invading his privacy. He had been the one who acted terribly first. He couldn't blame her for retaliating. Guess I'll just have to accept it. Bzzz. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Setting down the glass, he pulled out his phone, and when he saw the caller ID, he froze for a moment. Mayuko. Her calling at this moment made it impossible not to overthink things. But with the phone still buzzing, he didn't have time to sort out his thoughts. Without hesitation, he answered. Chisato, it's me. It's pretty noisy on your end. I'm working part-time right now. Please hold on a moment. Chisato tapped Sayaka on the shoulder, who was facing the stage. When she turned around, he gestured toward his phone. After getting a nod of approval, he swiftly stepped outside the store. With the noise cut off, he was greeted by fresh air and a vast, unobstructed night sky. It was actually quite beautiful. All right, I can talk now. I don't have anything urgent. I just think that things can't continue like this between you and Kazusa. Let's find a time to talk. Chisato instinctively gripped his phone tighter. Talk? You mean me, Kazusa, and you know, no, Chisato, you misunderstood me. Yuko cut him off with a light-hearted tone. When I say we, I mean just you and me. Not Kazusa. Given how she is right now, I doubt she'd be able to sit calmly and listen to you. Chisato let out a silent, weary sigh. How is Kazusa doing? Leaning back in a garden lounge chair, a small glass of red wine in hand, Yuko swirled it gently as she gazed at the deep red sky through the glass. Honestly, not great. She was starting to feel a little better these past few days, and with my encouragement, she finally decided to go to school and talk to you properly. Then hold on, Chisato, let me finish. She really did leave the house this morning. I even stood at the entrance and watched her go. But for some reason, about half an hour later, she came back in tears looking just like she did after that conversation with you at the hospital. Did you call her or send her a message that upset her? No. I've been calling her every day, but she never answers. As for messages, I didn't send anything this morning. Is that so? Then this is strange. If it wasn't you, what could have made her look so heartbroken, like she was about to cry? Yuko set down her wine glass and looked at her fingers. She hadn't played the piano in a long time, and her nails had grown quite long. I'm not sure. Hearing Yuko's description, Chisato had a vague suspicion in his heart, but he didn't voice it. Well, it's not that important. I'll ask Kazusa myself once she calms down. Let's get back to our original topic. I want to meet with you alone so we can calmly resolve the matter between you and Kazusa. You pulled me back from the hands of death. I have a lot I want to do with this second chance at life. Miss Yuko, are you planning to leave Kazusa's side again? Who knows? Maybe it depends on how our conversation goes. Perhaps it won't be me who leaves, but her who chooses to leave someone else's side. Chisato understood the implication behind Yuko's words, and his heart sank. He had considered this possibility long ago, but it was the last thing he wanted to happen. So, boyfriend Kun, when do you have time? I don't have much work recently, so I'm free whenever. Chisato thought for a moment. Tonight works. You're more impatient than I thought. Alright, got it. Yuko lazily got up from her lounge chair, intending to change clothes. Even for someone as carefree as her, going out in a bathrobe would be a bit too embarrassing. You're still working part-time right now, right? What time do you finish? Around 9 o'clock. That's already quite late. Yuko showed a troubled expression as she walked upstairs, lightly tapping her forehead with her finger. Let me think. What kind of proper establishment would let a student like you enter freely? Miss Yuko. Can't we just meet at your house? Yuko stopped mid-step, then smiled. How nostalgic. Not just you, Chisato. Many outstanding men have said that exact same line to me before. Chisato ignored the teasing remark. From her tone, he could tell she wasn't rejecting the idea. So, he pushed a little further, speaking in the tone of someone who understood her concerns. Miss Yuko, you're a beautiful woman, and lately, crime rates in Japan haven't been great. I thought it would be safer if I, as a man, went to you instead. Besides, this would save you the trouble of traveling. You've just recovered from a serious illness and need to rest. Going out unnecessarily isn't ideal. In one breath, he gave 3 seemingly reasonable arguments. I think I understand why Kazusa is so fixated on you. You speak well, you're good-looking. If I were 20 years younger, I might have fallen for you too. Faced with Yuko's comment, Chisato could only let out an awkward chuckle. Yuko chuckled along with him. Alright, I get what you're trying to do. Let's meet at my place, then. But let me warn you in advance, don't expect too much. Kazusa just finished dinner and took a bath before locking herself in her room again. Even if you come over, you probably won't get to see her. Chisato nodded calmly. I understand. Good. I'll be waiting at home. Be careful on your way here. Got it. After hanging up, Yuko turned around and headed back downstairs. Since she no longer needed to change clothes and go out, she decided to finish the glass of wine she had left untouched. Chapter 337, She is the culprit, definitely. Meanwhile, on the other end of the call, Chisato sat dazed on the edge of a flower bed, lost in thought. Even in such an unseemly position, he still attracted the gazes of passing women who sized him up curiously. Chisato replayed his conversation with Yuko in his mind. Though he hadn't asked outright, the fact that Yuko had actively sought him out for a private conversation was enough to confirm his suspicion. The detective from this afternoon was undoubtedly connected to his future mother-in-law. Since her secret plan had failed, she simply laid her cards on the table and took a more direct approach. That was quite in line with the image of Yuko that Chisato had in his mind. But there was another matter that weighed heavily on him. Miss Yuko had explicitly mentioned that, after much effort, Kazusa had finally been persuaded to go to school and talk to him today. Yet, not long after leaving home, she had turned back, looking like she had been bullied to the point of tears. Who could possibly bully Kazusa? That was a scenario he found difficult to picture. Chisato scrolled through his phone contacts, his gaze eventually settling on the name Utaha. This time, he wasn't making a deduction, he was simply following his intuition. And in fact, Chisato's intuition was spot on. As soon as the call connected and Utaha greeted him in her usual lazy tone, Chisato got straight to the point and asked her how she had spent her morning. On the other end, there was a brief silence. That reaction alone confirmed that his guess had been correct. So you found out. I was actually planning to tell you tonight when you got back. Was she nervous? Utaha was indeed a little nervous, but not entirely. After all, before taking action this morning, she had already prepared herself mentally to some extent. So now that she had been found out, she was only surprised that it happened a little earlier than expected. She didn't ask Chisato how he had learned about it, nor did she wait for him to press further. Instead, she calmly recounted everything: her meeting with Kazusa that morning, their conversation, Kazusa's expressions and reactions throughout, and how it all ended. When Utaha finished speaking, another silence followed. This time, the silence lasted a little longer. Holding her breath, Utaha listened to the sounds on the other end, the faint honking of cars, the chatter of pedestrians. The call hadn't been disconnected, which meant Chisato was still there. She glanced at the time and guessed that he was probably standing outside his part-time job store. I see. At last, Chisato let out a sigh, as if finally coming to terms with everything. He couldn't bring himself to be angry at Utaha. Or rather, considering he had the audacity to enjoy the blessings of multiple women, he had no right to blame her for anything. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had simply acted in a way that made perfect sense from her own perspective. This situation was a direct result of his choices. Even if Utaha had unintentionally revealed something that he hadn't yet had the chance to tell Kazusa, that, besides Kazusa, there were other girls by his side. But that wasn't Utaha's fault. It was his own failure to properly explain things to both her and Ariri. And in any case, this was something he would have to be honest with Kazusa about sooner or later. Who delivered the news didn't really matter. So when Chisato responded, his tone held no anger, no impatience, just the same gentle warmth as always. I'll be heading to Kazusa's house after work to talk with her mother, so I'll be home late. You don't have to wait up for me, get some rest early. Utaha felt somewhat relieved. Chisato's reaction was exactly as Ariri had told her before. Even though she had gone to meet Kazusa in secret without Chisato's permission, he wouldn't be angry at her. Unconsciously, Utaha let out a quiet sigh. The tension in her body eased, and her voice took on the sweet, delicate tone of a wife waiting for her husband to return home, soft and charming. I want to wait for you. I can't sleep unless you're holding me. Should I prepare a late-night snack for you? No need. Got it. Be safe on your way back tonight. After the call ended, Chisato finally stood up and turned to head back inside the store. Now that he had figured out why Kazusa had lost her resolve after finally making up her mind, he felt more prepared for their next meeting. Although Yuko had clearly told him not to expect to see Kazusa when it came to matters between lovers. Who could say for sure? Chisato had no perfect solution for Kazusa's current state, but there was one thing he was certain about. When it comes to love, if one truly desires lasting happiness, the only way is to meet sincerity with sincerity. Any other means are nothing but shortcuts leading to unfortunate endings. Thus, there was no other choice. Being completely honest with Kazusa and sincerely asking for her forgiveness. It was a clumsy approach, but if he wanted the happy ending he envisioned, there was no better way. Back at Starry Performance Hall, Chisato took over from Saga, who was busy at the bar counter. With swift and practiced movements, he prepared various drinks, quickly dispersing the crowd waiting at the bar. I never really thought about it before, but now I feel like having a capable guy at home is actually pretty nice. The home Saga referred to was Starry Hall, nothing more, nothing less. She said it on purpose, just as a playful tease for Chisato. A handsome young man just watching from the sidelines was already a pleasure, even without doing anything to him. No need for flattery. If you really think I'm doing a good job, just give me a raise. Chisato responded with a smile. You brat. Ever since your band started performing on stage, your share of the earnings has already far surpassed the salary I pay you, yet you're still eyeing my money. Oh, come on, boss. No one ever complains about having too much in their wallet, right? That may be true, but you don't seem to care about money at all. I heard from Nijika that you don't take a single cent from the band's income and even chip in your own money to help them upgrade their instruments. What's this? You won the lottery and became a millionaire? She actually guessed right. Except it wasn't a lottery, it was thanks to a generous mother. Chisato chuckled but didn't bother explaining further. I just think it's a necessary expense. They're improving every day, and I don't want their progress to be held back by something like instrument quality. Saga gave him a deep look before turning her gaze to the stage, where her little sister and the other three were performing. You're not wrong. Thanks to you, their popularity has been soaring. Not to mention, they're planning to participate in the Shibuya Music Festival soon. I assume you'll be going with them. I may not be much help, but at the very least, I can carry their bags and guitars. You really sell yourself short. Just as Saga finished speaking, a commotion erupted from the stage area. It turned out that after their performance ended, two particularly excited fans had rushed onto the stage, one eagerly asking Ecchi for an autograph, while the other approached Ryo, holding up his phone in an attempt to take a selfie with her. Again? This is the third time this week. Looks like I really need to hire some security for the store. Saga sighed but remained calm, knowing that, just like before, someone would step in and handle the situation. Chisato tossed aside the rag he was holding uncharged toward the stage, responding to the band's silent pleas for help. Saga cracked open a beer, watching as Chisato effortlessly dragged the two unruly fans to the edge of the stage. When his patient reasoning failed to get through to them, he simply hauled them toward the exit. One of them even tried to resist, only to find himself lifted off the ground by the collar with one hand. A slight shake of Chizato's fist was all it took for both troublemakers to wise up and scurry out the door. The audience, who had watched the whole thing unfold, erupted into cheers and whistles. Handsome, strong, academically brilliant, and talented in songwriting and composition. Is this guy even the same species as me? What kind of shoujo manga protagonist walked straight out into reality? Sayaka silently grumbled to herself, glancing between Chisato, who was walking back after handling the situation, and the three girls on stage, who now shared a look with Hitori. She figured she should really hire those security guards soon, otherwise, it felt like things were bound to get out of hand. Chapter 338, I won't give up on any of them. Around 9 p.m., Chisato packed up his things, ready to clock out. The Starry Night bar was still bustling, with customers gathered in small groups, chatting or drinking. But none of that concerned Chisato. He could leave the rest to the manager. Judging by the crowd, the bar likely wouldn't close until after midnight again. Hitori with his backpack slung over one shoulder, Chisato pushed open the recording studio door but didn't step inside. Instead, he simply called out from the doorway, "Time to head home." Inside, the members of Keshoku Band were huddled around a small table, playing Old Maid. Hitori seemed to be losing badly. Her adorable face was covered in sticky notes, completely obscuring her delicate features. Hearing her boyfriend's voice, Hitori turned around and responded softly. Then, she glanced at the other three girls. Seeing this, Naruto set down her cards. "Oh wow, it's already past 9. I guess we should wrap up for today." Ikuyo stretched her arms above her head. "Yeah, I need to head home too." Ryo tugged at Naruto's sleeve. "I don't want to go home." "Naruto, can I stay over at your place tonight?" "Sure, but there's no way we're sharing a bed. You sleep like a wild animal, so I'm taking the floor." The four girls pulled the sticky notes off their faces, tidied up the table, and stepped outside. They found Chisato standing by the roadside, casually fiddling with his phone while waiting. "Well then, see you tomorrow, Ikuyo-chan, Bachi-chan." "See you tomorrow." They waved at each other. Since Naruto lived in the apartment above the Starry Night bar, she and Ryo turned and headed inside. Ikuyo flagged down a taxi since they finished late today. Her family had insisted she take one home. "Shall we go?" Chisato slipped his phone back into his pocket. Hitori obediently fell into step beside him. Whenever he had no other plans after work, this was their routine. They'd walk to the train station together. When no one else was around, Chisato would sometimes act mischievously, like holding her hand or pulling her into a side alley on the way to the station, where they'd savor each other's taste, indulging in something a little naughty. But tonight, Chisato showed no such intentions. He walked properly, behaving himself the entire way. His unusually disciplined demeanor left Hitori feeling somewhat empty inside. After all, she had been secretly looking forward to it. Still, she hadn't forgotten the request Naruto and Ikuyo had entrusted to her. As they chatted idly, she found a gap in the conversation and nervously asked, "Chisato-kun, do you have time this Sunday?" Chisato glanced at her and replied, "Sunday? No plans yet." "Why?" Hitori explained, "It's about Naruto-chan. This Sunday is her birthday. She didn't tell us herself, so she probably wasn't planning on celebrating, but Ikuyo-chan, Ryo, and I all felt like that wouldn't be right. So we decided to throw her a surprise party. We'd really love for you to come too, Chisato-kun." After speaking, she felt like she might have been too abrupt, so she hurriedly added, "If you have time, of course." It wasn't a big deal, so Chisato responded without hesitation, "Of course, I'll be there." "But why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Because only Ryo knew Naruto-chan's birthday. She only remembered today when her phone reminded her." Chisato chuckled. "Yeah, that sounds just like her." "Haha, right." Hitori giggled along at his remark. "Today's Wednesday, which means we have 3 days to prepare. Where are you planning to hold the surprise party?" Hitori counted on her fingers before answering. "Ryo's place won't work. Her dad's hosting guests that day, so it'll either be at my house or Ikuyo-chan's." Chisato had been considering offering his place if they hadn't settled on a location. If that were the case, he could just let Ariri and Utaha know not to come over on Sunday. But since they already had a plan, there was no need for him to bring it up. "Sunday, huh?" Chisato pulled out his phone and glanced at the date, May 29th. Why did this feel so familiar? He searched his memory, and after a moment, he found the answer. Back when his relationship with Kazusa hadn't yet reached today's level of closeness, he had once borrowed her phone in her private music room. After lighting up the screen, he had naturally asked for the passcode. And back then, the password Kazusa had given him was 528. The previously blocked thoughts suddenly connected, and Chisato's eyes widened slightly. No wonder he had a strange sense of familiarity when he saw the date of Naruto's birthday. If his guess was correct, then Kazusa's birthday should be on May 28th, just one day before Naruto's this Saturday. That meant there were 2 days left. During the short walk of just over a dozen steps, Chizato's expression went through several changes. Beside him, Hitori noticed his reaction and could roughly guess that he was deep in thought, but with so little outward expression, she couldn't gather any useful information. So, with the gentle intention of not disturbing him, Hitori quietly fulfilled her role as a well-behaved kitten. She stepped forward and gently held his wrist while carefully paying attention to the road, the pedestrians, and bicycles passing by, preventing Chisato from stumbling while he was lost in thought. This thoughtfulness was something Chisato noticed when he snapped back to reality. He smiled slightly, withdrew his arm, and instead took the girl's hand in his own. "By the way, when's your birthday, Hitori?" Hitori was still blushing as she felt the warmth of her boyfriend's broad hand. She hadn't expected him to suddenly ask such a question, but she still answered quickly, "February 21st. That was quite early, still more than half a year away. Chisato nodded, indicating that he understood. "If we're preparing a surprise birthday party for Naruto, then naturally, we need to prepare gifts too, right?" "Yeah." Ikuyo-chan and Ryo seem to have already decided on what they want to give Naruto, but I'm still struggling to come up with a present. I have no idea what she'd like. To Chisato, Hitori's concern seemed unnecessary. Ultimately, as long as it's a gift that carries your feelings, that should be enough, right? If you're still unsure, how about we find some time to go shopping together in the shopping district? I need to figure out a present for Naruto too. Okay. Hitori agreed almost instantly, without even thinking. She had wanted to ask Chisato to go shopping together several times before, but her timid personality had always held her back. There was no way she would let this chance slip away. Even though their main goal was to pick a gift for Naruto-chan, something about it still felt a little off. But this was a great opportunity. Ever since they had kissed, she had been wondering about how their relationship could progress further. Now, it seemed like she had found a good chance. Alright, then it's decided. Tomorrow or the day after school, we'll go pick out a gift. Send me a message when you get home. Chisato finalized the plan. Hitori nodded firmly. After watching Hitori's train depart, Chisato turned around and boarded another train. 20 minutes later, he arrived at the gate of the Tma household. In the end, he had come. To be honest, he wasn't sure how Yuko would react to seeing him. But at this point, avoiding the situation wouldn't solve anything. He had to face it head-on. Taking a deep breath to clear his mind, he pressed the doorbell. Before long, the door's lock clicked open, and a voice came through the intercom below the doorbell. "Boyfriend Kun, I've been waiting for you. Come in." Chisato entered as instructed. At the entryway inside the house, Yuko was already waiting, having prepared a pair of slippers for him. He softly said, "Excuse me for intruding," then crouched down to change his shoes. As he did, he couldn't help but glance at the pair of women's leather shoes neatly placed beside him. Yuko noticed his gaze but said nothing. Instead, she led him to the living room and gestured for him to sit on the sofa. This wasn't his first time here, but this visit felt much more nerve-wracking than the previous ones. While Yuko went to pour some tea, he glanced up at the ceiling. Kazusa was probably in her room upstairs right now. "You arrived much later than I expected. Is your part-time job tiring?" Yuko didn't get straight to the main topic. Instead, she started with a casual conversation, pouring a cup of tea for Chisato before sitting a short distance away. Her words carried a sense of warmth and concern. But Chisato didn't follow her lead. Instead, he shook his head. "The people at my workplace are all really great. While the closing hours aren't exactly early, the workload itself isn't too exhausting." Yuko smiled slightly. "Is that so? I remember Kazusa mentioning that your part-time job is at a music venue where bands frequently perform. I never had much interest in such lively, youthful places, but after hearing you talk about it, I feel a little curious. Maybe I'll drop by sometime to see you at work. You'd treat me well, wouldn't you?" "Of course. You're always welcome." From the moment he stepped inside until now, their conversation had gone smoothly, and the atmosphere wasn't particularly oppressive. But Chisato knew this was only the beginning. "Then it's settled. Now, let's get to the main topic. Back at the hospital, there were too many inconveniences, and we couldn't have a proper talk. But now, we don't have that concern anymore. We have all the time we need." The relaxed smile on Yuko's face gradually faded, replaced by a stern and imposing demeanor. "What do you plan to do about Kazusa?" Just as Chisato had expected, things had reached this point. There was no avoiding it. He had to face it head-on. He had to voice that selfish, even despicable, thought within him. In the corridor facing the front door, The staircase that extended upward at the center. Kazusa silently descended from the second floor. She leaned against the corner of the wall, hidden from view in the living room, deliberately slowing her breathing. Chisato, of course, didn't notice her presence. His hands, resting on his knees, unconsciously clenched into fists as he responded to Yuko's serious question. I can't give up on Kazusa. His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm enough for Kazusa, hiding at the staircase landing, to hear clearly. Yuko stared at him for a moment before continuing in the same stern tone. Should I take that answer to mean that you've made up your mind? That you're choosing Kazusa and are ready to completely cut ties with the other girls in your life? I don't intend to do that. Chisato's response was immediate. Hearing this, Yuko's eyes narrowed slightly, the pressure in the room growing heavier. From the stairway, Kazusa, having heard her boyfriend's answer, bit her lip hard and clenched her fists tightly. After a brief silence, Yuko spoke again. So, you mean to say you're not giving up on Kazusa, but you're also not giving up on the other girls either? Yes. You told me back in the hospital that there are 3 other girls in your life. Including Kazusa, that makes 4. And you don't plan to give up on any of them, am I correct? Yes. At this point in the conversation, Chisato had laid everything out with a kind of brutal honesty. Even with Yuko's vast life experience, having seen all sorts of people and situations, she was momentarily speechless. As a world-renowned pianist, she was well aware of the extravagant private lives of bureaucrats and top-tier billionaires. She knew exactly how decadent things could get. But hearing something like this come from Chisato, a boy she had found somewhat decent, was still hard for her to accept. Chisato, do you even realize what you're saying? Even the Emperor of Japan can only have one wife. The Emperor is the Emperor. My life is not dictated by his standards. As a transmigrator, Chisato felt no particular respect for the Emperor. Fortunately, Yuko was also someone who lived freely and didn't care much about the Emperor. She had only brought him up as a casual example and wasn't particularly offended by Chisato's slightly irreverent tone. You sure talk big. Do you really think that with this attitude and reasoning, Kazusa will forgive you and accept you back?